got a urgent request to put this on tonight for Susie Beals, the Bremerton Housing Authority.
Sounds good. Yes. Well, you've seen her application. Everybody's seen it.
I haven't seen it. It was sent 2 hours ago.
So I'm glad you got your chance to look at it. Do you have any questions? I know Reverend Beals. She's very, very committed community servant, public. So yeah, presented her for confirmation.
But I don't think everyone did get a chance to look at the application.
I just want to make the assumption, Mayor, that not only does she have your support, but obviously that of Jill Stanton and Bremerton Housing Authority, or else it never would have been forwarded to you. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
Any other comments or questions for the mayor?
Well done.
And could I just ask what was the urgency for this item?
Well, they have a vacancy now with business.
Oh, okay, that came up a couple days ago or so.
Yes, I'd have to go back and find out exactly when it came in, and so we moved quickly as we could to see what this how's it going there, and it's like, well, they have votes that they need to take, and they need that. So
okay.
Yeah. I just prioritized that among all of my urgent requests and got to be as quick as I could.
Good deal. Yeah, I've did some poking around myself. Looks like a great person doing good work in the community. Not heavy on board experience, but good experience with a nonprofit. So, all right, sound like good for consent for everyone for next week?
Yes.
Objections? All right, this will go on consent for next week. Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. All right, next up, we have item A2, Managing Engineer Shane Weber, regarding a resolution to adopt the Warren Avenue Bridge multimodal project for design alternative.
Good evening, Council.
Evening.
I have a presentation.
Right.
Seems like we were here 2 weeks ago.
Right, we were.
Not too long ago. And so I got a slimmed down version of the same presentation. And I have Dan Penrose and Aaron Knight from Shakar Jewel here to help present this item. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
I'll fix that now.
Pleasure to meet you. Yeah, good to meet you. I think I saw you with that.
Here.
Yeah.
That's there.
It's better in virtual settings if you ask me.
I committed to calling you.
Oh, maybe again.
We had this last time.
I'm wanting.
Okay.
The small setting here.
That's what I thought. I'm missing it. Share content, then settings, then okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Wonderful. Sorry, I have about 20 emails open.
No worries.
Here we go.
3 items tonight. They're all meaty, but take our time.
Okay. There we go. And I'm going to hand it over to Dan to lead off with the presentation.
Well, members of council, Council President Coughlin, thanks again for your attention on this. And you could probably give this presentation by now. You've heard all of the background several times. So we're going to do this for context. There's just a handful of slides, and we'll screen through them. Make sure there's ample time left for discussion afterwards or questions. So touching on the project need, intent, and budget for the Warren Avenue Bridge multimodal project. As you recall, the bridge is owned by WashDOT. It's maintained by them. And so all of the design work has to be approved by them as well. So, and they have considerations on the types of things that they will allow and prefer on maintenance, and clearly we're deeply involved with them as the project has proceeded. So we're talking through a lot of that with WashDOT. The intent of the project is to add ADA accessible pedestrian and bike facilities for the bridge. None of those currently exist. Now, you say, how can that be possible? There is a pathway there. Well, that pathway doesn't meet ADA requirements. And so we expect there'll be some other improvements, including lighting and features that will enhance traffic safety and aesthetics. I think there's a lot of opportunity for making that bridge a real icon for the city. So we're excited about that. Maybe put it back on the logo when we get to that point. For the funding, the city pursued some funding vis-a-vis a grant, $1.5 million through the state for design, preliminary engineering and permitting, and $25 million in construction funding made its way through the legislature last year through the Moving Ahead Washington funding package. Ongoing efforts over the last 18 months included 5 stakeholder advisory group meetings, a series of city committee meetings, including Complete Streets and the ADA committee. I know you're well aware of the public feedback that has been going on. The project website has been up for the duration of that. We've used that project website to both share progress, stakeholder minutes and notes, as well as the survey location itself. A survey occurred in April, and we had a public open house. I know many of you attended that, and a virtual public open house following up with that in June. The screening process has consisted of three pretty distinct levels. The first one being a fatal flaw investigation, looking at structural feasibility and maintenance limitations. The second one being looking at the goals and objectives and the intent of the project, which is to add ADA accessible pedestrian facilities. So we looked at the alternatives that remain and value them through that ADA accessible pedestrian bike facility lens. And then finally, which one matches up with available funding and the intent and preferences that the public has expressed. So we are towards the end of that recommended alternative process, and we are seeking your recommendation on preferred alternative. Ultimately, though, WashDOT does have approval of the recommended alternative, so that's something we've always had in our mind as we've gone through the alternatives process, and I believe the public understands that pretty well. Yeah, this is the initial screening matrix. I know it is a bit of an eye chart from here, but I think it's as much for reference as for anything. Looked at 11 different alternatives of a variety of different compositions for clear width and clear spans for pedestrian bike access, as well as a variety of amenities like overlooks, and also some interesting things about the U-bit, which is that the vehicle that does the inspection. So all those are kind of stacked up together. We ran that fatal flaw analysis as part of it, just kind of the real basic, whether they meet the ability to maintain those facilities, as well as whether the structure itself can accommodate the additions. The second level of screening was really based on guidance we received from WashDOT, city's ADA committee, and public preferences through the surveys and open houses. And you'll recall those various levels of input from the community helped us work through the screening process. After the first 2 sets of screenings, there were 2 that remained. Alternative 2, which is 10-foot clear width on both sides, which is within budget at $25.6 million. And then the alternative number 3, which is a 12-foot clear width on both sides, while not being within the budget, did have other, was considered as part of this alternative add approach in the attempt to really make that clear span, that pedestrian access, multi-level access, as large as it is possible within the constraints of the budget and the other screening. So eyeballs really very much on the budget and the project cost, keeping that project within the constraints of the budget that's available to the city, with the recognition that that funding has been pushed out into the outer years of the state's transportation funding cycle. I think you're well aware of that as well. And so we are suggesting that the legislative partners continue to be partners with us on this project and look to pull that funding back into a more current year as we seek a construction and design within the next couple of years. So that is a very brief reminder of what we're looking at here, and I will turn it over to Shane for any other comments or anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think, over the last 18 months, we've gone through a pretty exhaustive feasibility analysis to determine whether or not this is structurally feasible, and I think we've hit that mark. We've also gone through a public outreach process, and I think, from our perspective, it's been pretty robust, trying to get public feedback on this. And we've done the work needed, as Dan indicated in his presentation. We think we've simmered up that public outreach and provided our recommendation based off from that and the feedback that we've heard overall on this project. And I think that, our recommendation is our recommendation moving forward. I think the one thing I would say is, just to be clear, our recommendation is, we have this 12-foot both sides option that is out of budget, but we would be looking at two different designs moving forward. One would be design of a 10-foot option on both sides, and that is within budget, but then we would design the 12-foot option on both sides. And if through the design process we have enough funding available for the 12-foot option, when we have the contractor bid the project and there's enough funding in there, if we get available bids, then that would be an option that we'd be able to select. So just to be clear, that's our recommendation to council. And I think there's the last things, there's a lot of strong opinions on this project. And, I've been delivering transportation projects for over 20 years, and I don't think I've delivered one where we haven't had strong opinions, or that we had everybody agree on what the project moving forward. So I understand that is part of the context as well. But this is our recommendation to council, and we're happy to answer questions as it relates to the body of work that we have presented to council and the recommendation. So I appreciate council's time tonight.
No, thank you all for your hard work over almost 2 years now, or going back even farther. So council, as you heard, we have a recommendation from the administration. As I spoke at last week during my council report, I kind of gave my take on the process as the council stakeholder, put forth my recommendation, and in the packet I wrote a similar resolution to what was recommended, going with alternative 8. We have really, if you count them all, the 5 viable alternatives in front of us we can choose from that are structurally sound and in budget. So it's hopefully our job tonight to see if we can come to a majority on which alternative to put forward. So do folks have any questions, comments, where they're leaning, which alternatives they like, what they don't like, anything that needs clarification?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So under the 12-foot and 5-foot, or the 14-foot and 5-foot proposals, I think those are option 8.
7 and 8.
7 and 8. What with the intent that the one of the lanes, 12 or the 14, is multimodal, bicycles and people, and the other one is more pedestrian. Is that going to be a requirement? Is it going to be marked that way, or are we still going to have the option of bikes going down a 5-foot sidewalk?
So the questions to me, sorry, you're looking at me. The questions to me, I think we can mark those as a preference. We can't. But my understanding, we can't have anyone standing there saying, "Oh no, don't go on this side." But clearly, the bicyclists prefer the 12 or 14-foot path versus trying to cram into the 5-foot path.
So then I would thank you for that. Can I ask for the administration's response to that, as far as what do you guys see as if there's any potential problems with the 12 or 14 and 5 scenario? What's wrong with that?
Well, I think I'll answer a from my perspective, I think there's two things that would cause me concern on that. I think the first one is you have that 5 foot side that quite honestly, it's going to be a challenge getting somebody with a bicycle and a wheelchair, or it's going to be a pretty constrained side of the bridge, right? And I think that that is a concern, and I think Councillor Younger, you talked a little bit about whether or not you could take and enforce, or sign or force people on one side or the other, and that's really not an option that we considered. I'm not sure we can necessarily do that. So, and then the second thing is that if one side of the bridge is used and it's wider, and you have cyclists using that side of the bridge because that's where they're more comfortable, then of course you have to look at how they're going to get across the street on both sides of the bridge, and that could be a potential issue as well. So, and those are the two concerns that I think that I would have with that. And I think Aaron and Dan, you guys have any other things that you?
Yeah, I think from our survey that we did in April, we saw a very strong preference towards equal width on both sides. So that was a big part of our, decision making here. But as Shane mentioned, 5 foot is not typically a multimodal facility. That would be a pedestrian focused facility. The city's code allows for bicycles to operate on sidewalks. And so there wouldn't necessarily be a prohibition of someone using it, but from a practical standpoint, it could create conflicts, and it would be, marginally wider than it is now, but not significant.
Okay. Would you agree that 12 or 14 foot on one side would be a good option if there was a tunnel underneath on one of the sides, so you could connect over that's not impeded by cars? In other words, are we missing something here? Because to me, 10 and 10 is a compromise, but sometimes in compromises, no one wins. And the 12 and the 14, the bicyclists seem to really have a preference for that, so they can ride side by side. So I understand that. And for the most part, anybody that lives around here is going to know, oh, that's the wide side. I'm going to ride my bicycle down that side. But there may be a few people that are not familiar with the area that may go and go on the wrong side, if you will. So any thoughts as far as the other connectivity options that have been mentioned? Would that make it more palatable to do the 12 and 14 than the 5?
I think that having those connections on both sides of the bridge, I think would help out with connectivity. I mean, being able to get people from one side to the other, just off the bridge is something that would help with connectivity. I think it would. But I think that, our focus has been on the bridge only within the budget that we have, and that's kind of where our recommendation is.
But the 12 and the 5 is under budget, and so is the 14 and 5.
Correct.
Even
Yes.
with the
Right.
U-bit. So those two are, in my opinion, on the table. But I've seen some letters saying that they weren't, the 12.5 and the 14.5 weren't fully explained or explored. And maybe the questioning wasn't, and the polling wasn't specific enough. It may have been flawed to get at the recommendation of 10 and 10. That's the suggestions. I'm not saying it was.
Part of the intent was to be consistent with the SR 303 corridor plan, which envisions 10-foot
10-foot sidewalk.
sidewalks throughout the corridor. So
Okay.
part of the question would be, how would we neck that down from 10 to 5 if we have one side of the bridge which is not at least 10?
Right, so they're all going down a 10-foot sidewalk, because bikes can ride on the sidewalks.
Right.
And I certainly would be on a sidewalk on Wheaton Way. I would not be on the street. And the second time I'll let the president call you. But then all of a sudden, when you get to the bridge, you got to cross over to be on that safer side, otherwise go down to 5. I see.
your floor if you want to. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Tom.
If you
Oh, go
want
ahead,
to, if
Tom.
you want to hear from Tom. Yeah.
Sure, Tom, please.
It's just one comment. I mean, I think we've probably all seen it. But people are lazy, right? And they cross where they are. They're going to cross the street, right? And they're not going to go half a block or even a few hundred, a few feet back across that crosswalk. I see it all the time where people are darting back and forth across, Warren Avenue, Green Way.
Yeah.
And so I think that you're going to see people darting across on either end of the bridge before the improvements, the connectivity is in place. But honestly, probably after the connectivity is in place as well. I think you're going to see that. I think that's
I don't disagree with you, Tom. That is human nature. I see it all the time. People don't go to the corner, and so that is something to consider, especially. Who in the right mind would cross Wheaton Way without having a crosswalk or whatever? But there's people that do it. I see it. Yeah. Interesting.
How about having Gordon?
I'm so sorry, we can't take input from not staff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
For my response, but I'll wait till my turn. I just saw there, Michael's hand up first.
So kind of on what Tom was saying, we have that section of the southbound Warren Avenue Bridge kind of at the top end where we've routed the sidewalk down below with a nice crosswalk, and people don't use that already. And I don't know if there's a plan in there to possibly fix that. So that's one issue about this idea that you're going to get everybody who needs to be across the street. I love the idea of a 14-foot crossing. I'd love to see 14 feet on both sides, and it may not be in the cards for us. But when I look at taking one side and adding 1.5 feet to it, that seems ridiculous and a waste of money on our half to do just 5 feet, and we get almost nothing out of it. So if we look at 5 feet on this side and 14 feet on that side, we've got 19 feet. The worst option we're being presented with is a total of 20 feet. And some of these situations that we've been presented where they have the 14-foot, it is the only pathway. And when everything has to go on one side, there's volume X. And when we keep it on two sides, it's X divided by 2, right? So the volume is, I think, is going to be fine. It may not be as sort of, I don't know, the only word in my head right now is luxurious. And I'm not really trying to say it like that, but just, the elbow room that we would get with the 14. But I think that, I think that I'd like to see the 12s. But I think that I find it ridiculous to do one side. It's almost the same amount of money. Really, the design's the same, the materials are a little bit less. The labor is pretty much the same to add 1.5 feet to that west side. So that's where I come across having a problem. And just human nature, as Tom was illustrating. And I don't know, like I said, I'd love to see the 14. It just doesn't seem to be in the cards for us right now. I'd like to see us submit for 12, and then if we had to, we could trim 1 or 2 sides to 10. That's all, and I'd love to see tunnels to cross over and all that kind of stuff, but that might be something we can grow into. But if we make a mistake by putting that 5 foot, how long has it been with this bridge? It's gonna be a long time before we could possibly do anything on that west side. So I would often am concerned about unintended consequences, and I'm afraid that people won't cross over. People will come barreling down on a bicycle, and that extra 1.5 feet is not going to be any better than it is today. So that's why.
Denise?
I think those are really good points. I want to know the ADA committee input. They felt, I think, unanimously that it needed to be both sides. And I'm sure that's accessibility, so that easily accessible on both sides is, and so, and yet there's been, I'm a little confused around there's been some challenges to that. I just remember some challenges to that. And I'd like to flesh that out a little bit, because we rely on our committees and our commissions, maybe not stamps of approval, but certainly for some guidance because of expertise or whatever on that committee or commission. And so if the ADA committee is saying we must have, you know, the full 5-foot side on one side and then, you know, 12 or 14, or were they saying they want equal on each side?
Yeah, so we have, Dan pulled up the slide here that we had key preferences. So we did present the options to the ADA committee. We did talk about the fact that we're looking at several different options of widening both sides and widening one side. We went through the alternatives as we did tonight. And what you see up there is the bottom line of what the advice that they gave us back, which is that they wanted to see improvements built on both sides of the bridge, and basically as wide as possible, but nothing less than 10 feet is what they basically what it came down to was their thoughts on that. And we use that as part of the public feedback, or as part of the feedback that we received on the project. Is what we did.
Right. I mean, obviously, if any human is asked, you want it on one side or both sides? I'm an and girl, you know that. So I want it on both. I just wanted to kind of poke and prod that element of it. Okay, that's helpful.
And I think, you know, in talking to the ADA committee, at least the folks in there that were visually impaired, I mean, they were interested in having more flexibility with the structure than less flexibility. And I think that may have contributed to some of those thoughts about having both sides of the bridge be widened as opposed to one, because it provides them more flexibility when they travel around.
And how about, since the north side of the bridge, the northeast side is District 2, that's where, you know, east, or the East Side Village project is going up. And so how are, especially the two alternatives that you're proposing, or, you know, is that a concern? You've got a huge number of people in wheelchairs, and right as that bridge dumps out, that's, you know, per capita, that's probably the highest population right now in that area. And so would both of those alternatives provide access that is acceptable from an ADA, you know, standpoint?
So the alternatives that we presented with tonight, because we're the improvements that we have on the bridge are ADA accessible, and we've designed them as such. But the improvements that we have off the bridge, we are including a very, very short tie-in of 40 feet to tie in the bridge itself into the existing sidewalk system. And that's what's included in the cost figures that you guys have before you.
Feet.
Yeah, 40 feet. So that's on all four corners of the bridge. And then we have two stairways on the north side of the bridge that need to be replaced. And we have to, you know, in order to tie in, we're going to be touching those stairs. So we got to replace them at the same time. So that's what the costs are included. So we don't, you know, outside of that 40-foot tie-in point to the existing sidewalk, we don't do anything else with this project outside of that.
So if we did increase that one side to 5 feet, because right now it's to 5 feet, that would be extended, however, out to the 40 feet on all sides. That's a guarantee.
Correct. correct.
40
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah, within the alternatives that we have here, the cost just to that 40-foot.
Right.
Minimal time.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Right. Yeah, at the very beginning, when we started going through this, we felt we had more budget, to do more off-bridge tie-in work, but we costed this out before the COVID, and costs have just increased a lot on us over the past couple of years. So it became apparent as we're going through and doing the feasibility study and the structural costing that budget was going to be an issue for us on this, and but the intent was to do more, but budget is limiting us on this.
That's it for me.
Thank you. I should just point out that I was showing page 34 of the packet to Councillor Fry, in which the ADA matter to which she referred is more fully discussed. Public comment. When, Council President, when you were first presenting this, you were talking about an alternative where a 12 to 14 on one side and a 5 foot on the other side would enable us to more or less within budget establish connectivity on both ends. I didn't see that in this. Could you expand on that a bit?
Sure, I'm happy to share from my computer on all the alternatives that are available to us to choose from. Give me 1 second.
My question is specifically that this could be done that it could all be done within budget.
Yes, so what is currently in budget, that is also feasible, doesn't have fatal flaws, is 8 foot on both sides, 10 foot on both sides, 5 on the west and 12 on the east, 5 on the west and 14 on the east. Those are all under budget, all 4 of those.
But none of them, none of these alternatives plus the connectivity would come in under budget.
Right, the
Okay.
Contractor's estimate for the well, I shouldn't say that. The alternative 7, that's 12 on the east side, 5 on the west, is about 2.5 million less than the other, than the 10 and 10 and 5 and 14. So that would be 2.5 million that could be either spent on getting the 5 foot side to 8. That's just about in budget, especially if we don't account for the U-bit, or that 2.5 could be spent on connectors. They won't be able to get all of them, but it'd be a chunk.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about how are wheelchairs currently exiting the bridge if their only access point is stairs?
There's existing sidewalk on all 4 corners of the bridge right now.
So the stairs are,
The stairs on the north side, they connect the upper part of 303 down to Lebo. But if you go beyond those stairs, there's a really rough existing sidewalk.
Juniper?
Yeah, well, on the west side, it goes to the loop ramp, and we just built 10-foot sidewalks on that loop ramp a couple of years ago as part of the Lebo project, but we didn't bring it all the way to the bridge. And on the east side of the bridge, there's an asphalt sidewalk that kind of sort of dead ends as you go down off the off ramp. So it's not great connectors, really on both sides as it exists today. And they don't meet ADA accessibility. And I did actually a few years ago, one of the ADA committee members, Doug Wood, he did take me down there with his wheelchair, and it was really rough watching him get around down there. And to the point where he decided that he didn't, because he had so much battery life in his chair, he chose to go down to Lebo and to get into downtown instead of going across the bridge. So it's in need.
Okay. Sorry, it's gonna take me a minute to recover from that one. Okay, I like alternative, hang on. Sorry, I was right there. I like the alternative 7, if that's the 14 footer.
8 is 14, so it's 12.
Yeah, then I like alternative 8 because it's super extremely very terrifying to walk I haven't tried biking on the west side of the bridge. The cars are going past at 45 and 55 miles an hour, and I doubt that anything will be done about that. So, making that like wider, it's still going to be terrifying. Whereas the east side is, the cars are going uphill. They're staying at a steady 45, 50 miles an hour. It's much calmer. I like this. My only change that I would make is the additional funds to go towards expanding accessibility and connectivity rather than expanding the west side. That's all I got. Masterly presentation.
Thank you. Take a turn around here, and I guess I'll apply to a second round, addressing some of the comments I heard. So the reason 5 feet is the minimum required. So going back to costs, several of the original proposals that were brought to council that council directed to be studied in 2021 specifically did just do one side, to your comment, Councilmember Goodnow, because of the extreme cost savings. By doing a large one-sided path, which is pretty standard, you could save a lot of money. After a year and a half, we finally got an answer from WashDOT. It was not clear until a couple months ago that they would require both sides to be improved to a 5-foot minimum. So that finally that requirement came down, which eliminated the alternatives that didn't require it. So you're right, it is spending extra money to go from 3.5 to 5 feet, but that's because of WashDOT's requirement. To your comment, Councilmember Younger, about the signage, the east side ties into the bridge-to-bridge trail. That is where the existing bike network is. Lebo on the north end, and then the existing Bremerton bike trail is through Evergreen Park, leading up to the bridge from the east side. So if people are following kind of the existing bike connectivity bike network, they'll already be on the east side. There's not a real big need to cross over, and there are crossings not too far from the bridge. You're right, if someone makes a last-second decision, oh man, I'm 100 feet from the bridge, let me cross, okay. But if people are doing the regular routes, if they're walking, if they're doing the bridge-to-bridge trail, of which this is supposed to be a major component, they'll already be on the east side. We talk about concerns about 5 foot on the west side. I'll know that the sidewalks all around there towards Olympic College, I mean, they're, I think, 3-4 feet. They're not very wide. Even the newly done sidewalk that goes down Lebo and curves around, I believe, is only 5 feet. So there's almost a what's the point of widening beyond 5 feet if the connectors, all the sidewalks leading up to it are less than that anyway. So the comment about the ADA committee, I'm just going to quickly summarize a letter from Jane Revelowski we got, who was one of the, I believe, one of the only 3 non-staff members at that meeting when they were asked about it. And the response was basically that she felt they didn't get all of the information at the time when they gave those recommendations. And it's in the packet, page 34, thank you. My packet just closed on me. So if you have it handy,
I do.
Anna, I wouldn't mind if you.
Bremerton City staff presented options for the Warren Avenue multimodal without providing information discussed in stakeholder meetings. We were unaware that the cycling community had proposed keeping the majority of cyclists on a 12 or 14-foot east side route. Resident committee members thought that cyclists would be overwhelming both sides of bridge and therefore voted for both sides of bridge improvements to be a minimum of 10 foot each side. I believe if we had all the information, our vote might have been different. I know mine would have been. And then she is recommending alternative 8.
Well, thank you. And so, again, I know we can't enforce or tell someone you absolutely can't go on one side of the bridge, but we have signage all throughout the city for bike routes that direct bikes and tell them where a bike route is going. I don't see why this can't be any different and said, here's the official bike route like we already have through the city. As far as the statement that there's a strong preference toward equal width, that by my determination is based entirely on a single question on the online survey that said, would you prefer one side or two? I've already spoken up how I think that was a very biased question. The community has not had to grapple with what we're grappling with now. And how do you get the best bang for your buck in weighing hard trade-offs when we have limited budget? So if you're somebody taking that online survey and you say, oh, one side or two, hey, I like 2 sides, why not? They didn't actually get the question of, do you want one wide side or 2 smaller sides? So I really don't think that question has merit. What to your statement, Councilmember Good now about bridges that have one wide side and one other. I think I've shown numerous examples where you're right. Sometimes, like the Manette Bridge, you just have one wide side. Many other examples show a one wide side and a 5 foot. And in the packet of my presentation, I think there's 4 different examples, 3 of which have that. One specifically is 16 and 5. And in that case, they purposely chose not to remodel the 5 foot side and label it pedestrian only. So I think it's actually quite common, in fact, the modern bridge standard to do one wide side and either nothing or narrow on the other. I will throw out to council. My recommendation was go with the 14 and 5. If we get extra money, we could expand that 5 to say 8, maybe even 10 if we get lots of extra money. Another option on the table, like I will not support 10, but another option on the table is alternative 7 with 12 on one side. And it does get to, again, if you don't account for the U-bit, it's already in budget to do 12 on one side and 8 on the other. That is an option. It's not 100% certain WashDOT will actually require us to pay for that U-bit. I'll sum up before we do a second round here. I think 14 is the right thing to do. I think it's the modern option. I think it's the only real safe option. I'm not hearing anything that really argues strongly against it. And I think we should lead with what's the best thing for Bremerton and then require WashDOT to follow within reason what we're doing. And they have given us a letter saying that support whatever we choose. So that's kind of where I'm at. But if we want to do a second round and any other lingering questions or thoughts.
I have a question. Okay, I understand the trail, but if you're going down Wheaton Way, the intention on Wheaton Way is to have 10-foot sidewalks, right? That's the proposal.
Yes.
So when I'm hearing arguments, well, I need to have a 14-foot wide lane on the bridge, you're having a 10-foot wide lane going to and from the bridge. I don't understand. The cars are still going the same speed. You get a little more comfort on one side. I mean, I'm not a bicyclist, but you know what I'm saying? So if you go with 10-10, you're consistent with the sidewalks. Doesn't matter which side you're on. So that, you know, we're going to have public testimony next week, but that's where I'm kind of sticking on right now is 10-10, if that's what their sidewalks are. Like you were saying.
Is there a question to me or just around?
No, that wasn't a question. That was a comment because we had our earlier comments. We had saying that the cars are speeding up, so I want to have 14. Well, the cars are speeding up before you get to the bridge, and it's 10. So, yeah, that's all I got.
And he raised his hand. Councilman Denny.
Oh, Councilmember Denny, you online?
No.
He is.
Yep, been here the whole time. Question for the administration.
Just for the record, real quick, since the beginning of the meeting? Okay, all right. Sorry, I didn't know you were gonna be remote. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, go ahead. You have all the time you want. You're round 2.
You're fine. Question for the administration. Why was the east side chosen as the wider path versus the west side? Being District 4, I gotta ask it for my constituents.
Yes. Question.
Yes.
So,
Why east side, not west side for the?
for the wider option, well, I mean, we had originally started looking at, you know, there's a proposal that the West Sound Cycle Club presented that had one wider side option. And that's what we started looking at. And then the West Sound Cycle, and they originally had a proposal for the west side. And then, you know, in December this year, they switched to the east side, and we decided to take a look at both to make sure we're comprehensive and we're looking at everything. So that's kind of sort of the way it went. And since our recommendation is in one wide side, I can't speak to the other recommendation on that, but I think that that's the reason why we started taking a look at both of those really wide sides in our analysis is basically it's Cycle Club had an option there. We want to make sure we're pretty comprehensive looking at everything. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure
Thanks for that. And remind me again, the administration, you're recommending either 7 or 8, or is there a preference? I kind of lost it when.
Yeah, so what we're recommending is alternative 2 and alternative 3. And alternative 2 is within budget. And alternative 3 is not within budget, but our approach would be to carry both of those alternatives through the design process. And when we get to a point of having a contractor bid on both of those designs, if we get favorable bids, then we could select the one that is within budget at that point in time. And we'll know at going through design, we're going to have estimate updates so we can have those through design, but that was our approach is that recommendation.
Got you. And so, sorry, so when I'm looking at the presentation, when it says the 2 alternatives that council will be looking at are 7 and 8, if you could go to that slide.
So Councilmember Denny, that was my presentation from last week.
Got you. Okay, got you. I was confused as to where that was coming from. All right. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning alternative 3 with the ADA committee and the committee on I believe it was Equity and Civil Rights Committee. What committee was that? That was a state committee, or was that a city committee?
That's a WashDOT.
If I remember from last study session, they recommended whatever they do to one side, you do to the other. Was that their recommendation?
So when we presented this to the ADA committee, they recommended that we widen both sides of the bridge, and then their recommendation is that we not make the expansion less than 10 feet on either side, is what their recommendation was. So basically, they supported alternatives 2 and 3.
But specifically, we took the issue to the WashDOT Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and they indicated they would not be supportive of a design that didn't remove ADA barriers when there are other viable choices. So they said, hey, if you're given the choice, you need to relieve this barrier, this 3.5 foot barrier, with an ADA accessible route.
Got you. And 5 feet is the ADA accessible route, if I remember
correctly.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so they're more concerned about it being 5 feet on both sides rather than it being equal on both sides. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. For that WashDOT Office of Equity and Civil Rights, yes, they're more interested in ADA minimums rather than any other choices.
Okay, I think I'd like to hear public testimony, but I'm probably leaning towards alternative 3 at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, who hadn't spoken to Strand? Anna?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Because then, okay.
When I just want to go back to Jane Rivlowski's email on page 34, it appears that when Public Works presented or you presented to the ADA committee, that the presentation was, what about 10 foot on either side, which is, the SR 303 recommendation. Is that accurate? Did you review all the possible alternatives with the ADA committee?
We did. We reviewed the alternatives with the ADA committee, and I can't comment on Jane's email.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm just, I still really like alternative 8. The thing about being on the west side is that the winds coming from the west and coming from the traffic, if you're on a bike, are seriously buffeting. They're pretty bad on either side, but they're really spooky on the west. I think that this is a fiscally conservative alternative, and it's also attractive. It's attractive to people to come to live here. It's not a festival bridge, but it's festive. One of the concerns that I had was that most of the examples we've seen are on flat bridges, which must be nice. But we're looking at a couple of mock-ups in President Coughlin's presentation where they're going over white salmon, and that looks like it's an angle that approximates the Warren Avenue Bridge. I like it. It's supported by the cycling community. It's attractive looking, and not really gonna. If we're having additional public comment on this down the line, is that correct?
Yes, we'll have to make that decision, before wrapping up.
Yep, I still like alternative 8.
Okay. Any other,
Well, this would be my third shot. I'll go. I just, you made the comment about if we increase the west side to 5 feet, it'll connect to the other 5 feet sidewalks. But we've established that our goal, which is not going to happen the day this opens, but our goal is to put a 10-foot sidewalk. So now we create these 10-foot down to 5-foot, 10-foot, and on the other side we have 10-foot up to 14-foot down to 10-foot, where we could have these just beautiful corridors that connect downtown to East Bremerton. Maybe we would stop having this east-west thing.
Maybe. I don't know. The ship keeps getting big.
Yeah, well, again, it's more bandwidth to do 2 10s. It's more bandwidth to do 2 12s. More bandwidth to do a 10 and a 12, as opposed to a 5 and a 14, just max of 19 feet. And because the 5 is so much smaller, you're then trying to move all bicycle traffic to one side, which probably won't be successful. I think we're just asking for trouble.
Denise, do you have a turn this around?
This is tough work, folks. Wow. I have to be careful because I like things in balance, and I like when you say corridors, and I start getting visionary, and I do like matching and things like that. But I am concerned. That's why I asked. Okay, we got a 5 foot, and then what does that hit? And then, what's the plan? Oh, 10 foot. Oh, okay. So we got a bridge we can't change, and now it's not consistent. So I'm saying a minimum of 10 feet on both sides, and I'd rather go 12. Shoot, we could squeeze out 14 on the east side. That'd be wonderful. I do like that 10 foot. If we did it for Lebo, we do it on the bridge. It's consistent. It's this vision of modality, multimodality. So that's where I'm leaning.
I'll guess what, round around 3. So I would encourage you all really go back to the public comments. We've heard quite forcefully from pretty much all members of the bicycle community, not just one group, but many groups, about how 12 feet is really the minimum safe option. I've showed you how that is in several design manuals. Because yeah, you're going to have people coming both ways. So back to an earlier comment, I don't think we should be choosing mediocre on both sides. We should be choosing the best option that meets the goals, which is multimodal transport, right? This whole thing is not just pedestrians, bikes, and pedestrians and other non-motorized transport. And so the best way to achieve that is a very wide path. You can actually get 2 people passing safely. 10 feet is not safe. I'll say that till I'm blue. 10 feet is not safe. I've ridden across 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot, 14 foot. I can tell you 10 is not safe. And when you look at the public comments, there's a strong preference of a minimum of at least 12 feet. I think that's what we need to meet. That's why I can't support without at least one side being 12 and having that, in budget. Kind of keep hearing how this went to the ADA committee. The ADA committee, we're hearing that it doesn't sound like they got the full picture. Never mind, the ADA committee is again, there's only 3 citizens on there. Their input should be as the minimum path width. For some reason, this didn't go to Complete Streets Committee since last year. What we saw on there, 2021, 2022. These alternatives that we're deciding between right now have not gone to Complete Streets Committee. They have not weighed in on this. That's very concerning to me. And I'll let you draw conclusions why, but maybe they have a different opinion than the ADA committee. Yeah, and to clarify Councilmember Bennett's comment, yeah, agreed. WashDOT did not give a recommendation. They said they'd support whatever we came up with. Again, as long as it was at least 5 foot on both sides. But I think the public's heavily in favor of 7 and 8. I would caution against. So I guess the caution is moving forward too quickly without getting kind of final community feedback. One thing we could do next week is go and just take public comment only, like we've done with other tricky items. Some of the questions about the long-term connectivity could be shown and answered in terms of how it extends off the bridge and the whole plan, and about let's hear from the experts on how they would handle it, how they would bike it. No one sitting at this table right now is a bike expert. Any thoughts on that proposal or pushback? Or yeah, let's go Michael Banana. Oh, sorry, Michael. Up.
All right. So first of all, I understand that all the groups, and every time we've looked at this, the information has changed a little bit. So I understand that ADA was presented with maybe some different version of where we're at now, and I can understand how that reflects. But our job is to take the data that we've had and figure this out. So I'm definitely taking that into consideration, and I'm a huge fan of the Cycle Club, and I've met with them directly, and I again love the idea of the wide sort of promenade. But one of the things about when you reference the safety issue with 10 feet, the majority of cycles are going to be coming from street traffic and moving on to the modal pathway. They're going to be on 303, and when they get to this area, they're going to move into the sidewalk. So most bicycles are going to be coming southbound on the west side and northbound on the east side. So really, you're going to have a side where folks are going to climb and people are going to come down. And again, that's going to be whether we have a 5, a 14, or whatever. Especially without having the connections, the tunnels, the things like that are pretty expensive. The other thing is that I feel that the folks who walk the bridge, the folks who commute by foot on the bridge, folks who walk there, push a stroller on the bridge, they're not organized. They don't have a club. And I just feel like we have to balance out what we're hearing. And yes, the quantity of cyclists is high, and I want to see more cyclists, but I'm not convinced that giving up 5 feet of access on one side to add 4 feet on the other is a trade-off that makes sense for me fiscally and to serve the greatest number of Bremertonians.
Yeah, so please disregard the pun, but I think we've overlooked the overlooks. When you look at the matrix, alternative to the city's preferred alternative has 4 overlooks. So those are bump outs, right? So if you look at the alternative 8, there are no bump outs, nor alternative 7. The reason why I mentioned that, alternative 8 has 5 foot on one side. If you are pushing a stroller or in a wheelchair and you see a bicyclist coming up, you have no option to go to that overlook because you want, it's like, I'm not in a hurry, let this guy go by. You don't have that option. That's huge. And then the other thing is, I agree with Councilmember Denny. I like the 12 foot, but we need to deliver, in my opinion. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, but the budget is $25 million, 25, whatever it was in there. The other one's over. So yes, option 3, alternative 3 could be part as administration is proposing, 2 and 3 if money is available. Well, we all know this is going to go up through the roof. And so we need to deliver, hey, legislature, you said the grant money is for 26.5 million. Thank you. Here's a project that costs $26.5 million. And then later on, when it comes time to actually build this thing, it's more, but our intent was good. We did it. We did the parameters. Can we have more money? And then it's likely, in my opinion, and I've been around a while, if you go in and your option is already the Cadillac, alternative 3, 29 million, there's a $4 million delta. I would think they'd say, okay, city, you knew this going in. Why don't you chip in some more money? And we all know how precious our REIT money is, but I would think they'd want to take that, have us chip in extra money for that if you want that. So I'll listen to the public testimony, but I'm really leaning towards alternative 2 what the administration is proposing. It makes sense for the general public. It does make sense. And I really like the overlooks, the bump outs. Oh, so it's my floor, so I can go ahead and ask.
Go ahead. You got a question?
You pointed me. Yeah. So one thing that I just wanted to share is we actually have an employee, one of my employees was using the Warren Avenue Bridge, 4-foot sidewalk. She's running. She met somebody that was threatening and unsavory, and she turned around and ran the other way and stopped using the Warren Avenue Bridge. If you go from 4 feet to 5 feet, and you got how long is that bridge, Shane? Third of a mile, and you have 1,700 feet or whatever that is, and you're a woman and you're crossing on that bridge with 5 feet of width on the west side, and you meet that person, you gotta know where to go. And 10 feet doesn't necessarily solve that, but it's more comfortable for people that are coming up against other people that, like, we just got in an elevator and it felt a little tight, right? So we experienced that with staff, and I was really, I'm glad she came and told me about it, but that's a real dynamic.
Okay, I see the floor.
Thank you. Be a final round. Decide our next steps. Anyone else? Oh, yes, Quinn.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, I also overlooked the overlooks. So let me ask a question of the administration. This would be 2 overlooks on each side, and it looks like they're 6 feet out by 24 feet. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. So there'd be 2 on each side.
Okay. Yeah, I really like that. And until Councilmember Younger reminded me, I forgot that alternative 3 is about $3 million over budget. So I'm leaning towards alternative 2 as well. Especially, I don't want it to be a district fight, but this bridge does touch 4 districts. And having a 5-foot on District 4 and District 1, Councilmember Chamberlain's district and my district, I would really want to encourage a lot of biking and make it safe for folks who are using wheelchairs on both sides. And 5 feet to me, it just doesn't seem equitable. So I have, like Councilmember Younger, I'm going to listen to testimony, but alternative 2 seems correct to me. And my question for the administration was, it was put on the floor. Do we want to talk about this at another study session? Is there, I believe last study session, there was an argument for moving it along sooner than later. And I want to be reminded what that argument was by the administration, if there was one, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And yes, we did talk about it at the information session. So the argument is that this past legislative session, we have $25 million, in which is basically the construction funding for this project. And we thought that we were going to have it, next year, this year or next year, to be able to have in our pocket. But the legislature decided to move that $25 million and that construction funding to program in 2029 plus, which is basically the outer years. We didn't anticipate that. That was something that the legislature did. And when we were talking to our lobbyists about what we can do to move that funding back, so that we can construct this project, basically what we were told is that we have to be under design and demonstrate for this upcoming legislative session that we are on track to deliver this project. We're under design, and that we need that $25 million. And I think Dan brought it up last meeting, but swiping money on projects is a real thing. The Belfair bypass has been going on for years and years and years and years, and they're still not fully funded. And so our concern is that if we don't make a decision, if we're not allowed to move forward in design really quickly this year, and I scheduled up another council session for SCJ to move their design forward in September, then we would be at risk with not being able to demonstrate we have that $25 million that we can reprogram and move forward. So there's a sense of urgency for us to get under design as quick as possible to be able to have that demonstration, make that demonstration for this next legislative session. That's why we are wanting to wrap this decision up so we can move forward sooner.
Okay, thanks for refreshing my recollection on that, and I find that very persuasive. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
One thing that strikes me is that going with the recommendation from staff, which it appears to me to be the most pragmatic, it's trust. Because we're being told, we're going to try to get this extra money to give you those 2 extra feet on each side. And then we trust that the heat is being turned up enough with the appropriate people. And I understand how all that works and how it doesn't work and how it falls apart and all of that. It was so disappointing. I want to say that I trust. For one thing, we're on public record. Your city council wants both sides. We want both, and we want them as big as possible. And we want the overhangs or whatever they are, and we want it. And it's going to require a lot of communication and a lot of, I think, prioritization with staff. I mean, because they're the ones that direct the grant writing and, all of that. So I'll do anything I can with lobbying to make this bridge happen. And I think we should do it, quickly. So I want to say that I trust. I think it comes down to that for me. Do I trust you enough? Do I trust the consultants in the administration enough that you've heard us and that you'll deliver to us if you can? And I trust, I do at this point.
I appreciate that. And, I'm the project manager for this project moving forward. And my number one goal is to get this job under design and to get it delivered. Now we have a little bit of ways to go with wrapping up what we need for permitting. We have an issue with WashDOT with the U-bit. If we have a 12-foot option, then there's the U-bit that we don't understand fully what that cost is because WashDOT hasn't. They're telling us it's going to be a while for them to wrap their arms around it to give us what that mitigation looks like. So there's some things that we need to figure out as we move forward, and we're just chomping at the bit to just get going. And so I appreciate your comments, and that this is a big priority for me to get this job moving forward. Can I just mention one thing real quick? And Tom reminded me, but I know President Coughlin, you're talking about 14 foot on one side and as wide as you can on the other. Tom reminded me that we have a structural limit on this bridge. The bridge itself, there's a threshold that we can only add 10% of the overall bridge weight onto the bridge before it requires a seismic retrofit. And when we went through and we did the design options here, the structural feasibility of a 14-foot clear width on both sides, it was not structural feasible. And so a 14-foot on one side and as wide as you can make it on the other side. We didn't do that analysis as part of our alternatives. I don't know where that limit is on the other side. So I just wanted to make clear that that is a limitation for us, and we haven't fully vetted out what that looks like if in that particular situation or an alternative.
So your alternative 3 is 12 foot on each side for a total of 24 foot.
Correct.
I'm just an unfrozen caveman lawyer, but isn't that a total of 24 foot, which would be greater than 14 foot and even 10 foot, or equivalent to 14 and up to 10 foot?
Correct.
Is the asymmetry affecting the seismic load?
So
The load that as it would respond to a seismic event?
So I don't, what I'm saying is that we haven't looked at that option with our structural engineer in specific to determine whether or not it does. I mean, one would practically say, okay, well, you have 14 foot and 10 foot here, that's 24, and you have 12, that's 24. So practically speaking, maybe that could be a conclusion. We have not looked at that. So we don't know for sure what that looks like. So I'm just trying to make that clear that that's not something we looked at with our analysis.
Is that,
And Aaron, do you have anything else to say on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that through the comments from council, we did take another look and really try to evaluate the cost estimating to a level that we hadn't initially done. And one of the things that is very clear is that as we extend the cantilever of the width of the walkway, it's not a linear increase in the cost. It's an exponential increase in the amount of steel that it takes to physically build it. And so I know it's been asked throughout this process about kind of the reprioritization of total feet, and then how do you divvy that up? And kind of the answer is that once we get to 14 feet, it's exponentially greater. It's rising at an exponential rate as opposed to a linear rate. So we have greater constraints with going with those larger cantilevers. I hope that helps.
it does help. I guess my final question to you, project manager, whoever, is would it be possible to get the structural engineer to look at the 14 and 5 or 14 and 10 before next council meeting?
Yikes. In terms of a cost or
in terms of seismic,
of a seismic of a feasibility?
Yeah.
I think that would be something. What do you think?
I think it's something that we can request. I can't guarantee. Yeah, we'd be happy to talk to our structural engineer about it.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm just going to suggest, since only 2 counselors so far are liking alternative 8, that we bring this to general business next week and choose something at that time, because at this point it seems that a majority of council have made up their minds, absent the public comment that we might get next week. So I'm simply proposing that to. I'm all done. Thank you, gentlemen.
I'll respond to a few things I heard and then take a thumbs up down on whether to just take comments or go general. There's some comments about the existing connectors. I just want to remind council that connectors would follow the bridge. They're already would have to be separate projects. So whatever design we choose for the bridge, we'd build appropriate connectors for that side. There wouldn't be a case where we build connectors wider than leading up to the bridge and waste money. As far as safety and thinking about walkers, strollers, and all that, of course, walkers and strollers I think would want as wide as possible as well. I walked around town with a stroller, and I can tell you, yep, having a maneuver around, you want that. And if you're someone worried about safety while you're running, then yeah, 14 feet is way better than 10 to be able to avoid somebody who might want to do you harm. There was mention of a bike group. I just want to remind you, it's not just one bike group. It's about every bike advocate out there. Some are affiliated with groups, some aren't. is telling you 12 feet's the minimum. I think you should listen to them. As far as the overlooks go, I actually costed it out from looking at different alternatives. It's about 100,000 to add each overlook on. I don't see why they couldn't be added to the 5-foot side if that was a desire. If they're not going to break the bank or budget, they don't cost that much. And that said, if you had a 12 or 14-foot side, you don't really need overlooks because you got this nice, wide, beautiful side like most other modern cities. As far as the urgency goes, I mean, I've talked to folks in the governor's office, right? What happened was the legislature assigned a whole lot of infrastructure money, which is fantastic. But WashDOT basically said, we don't have the staff, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the rebar in place to deliver all those projects. So they had to pick and choose which ones are going on now. Unless some other project takes a nosedive, honestly, the odds of ours getting advanced, I think, are slim. And I'm going to say I think it's slimmer if we don't have a really good consensus and everyone on board. But if we're talking less legislative session, I don't think waiting another 2 weeks at this point would hurt us to get a little less public feedback and resolve some of these outstanding questions I know folks have. So do we want to go a couple more months? No. I think we should make a decision soonish, but putting it off one more council meeting for a final decision is not going to it's not going to make a difference. We're already 6 months at least behind on where we were going to be on this project. Again, I don't think we're on a rush. Yeah, I'll say out loud that we know 14 and 14 is too much weight seismically. 12 and 12 is fine. 12 and 8, God, 99.99% sure you run the analysis, that's going to be fine. I bet 14 and 10 is fine. 14 and 8's got to be just fine. So yeah, we know that once you get to the double 14s, that's going to be your limit. And then as far as the cost goes, something else I've dug into, going from 8 to 10 is about the same extra money to go from 8 to 10. 10 to 12 is the same extra money. 12 and 14 by the estimates cost more. What is interesting is when you look at that, it's about just over $1 million to go from 8 to 10, just over $1 million to go from 10 to 12. All of a sudden, the estimates are about $2.2 million to go from 12 to 14. And I started working with Shane on this to figure out why. And yeah, it does cost a little bit of extra steel, but not more than double. So I'm actually, look, I'm the closest thing we got to an engineer in this council, right? I've got a physics degree, project management. I think the 14 and 5 is actually over budgeted, in my opinion. So that said, I think our options are to take, it sounds like the administration's decision to general business with possible vote next week, or to put all the options out to the public and get some input and then reconvene study session and then take a vote the following. So option 1, we go to vote next week. Option 2, we just get public comment. People want to hold up what they're looking at doing. So one is for a vote, 2 is to get comments and come back. Sorry. Is that clear? Do you want to make sure that's clear first?
Yeah, I didn't know we were doing a straw poll. What's the?
Gotcha. So we'll say option 1 is this current, what's on the agenda carries forward to general business for public comment and a vote, the administration's alternative. Option 2 is we just go to the public for input on this next week, since we haven't actually taken input at council, just the public meetings. So 1 vote next week, 2 public input only.
I would support the majority of council.
Let's see, a 2 from Quinn, 2 from myself. I don't know, just want to weigh in on what they'd like to do.
God, I want to get this over. I feel like we've gotten a lot of input, and yet I also don't want to hear from my friends at the cycling club if I rush this, right? And because I respect their voice, and yet the council member in me says, let's get public input next week and vote. I mean, I don't think this is something where we're going to come to consensus. And I don't think the testimony we hear next week is going to make me change. I mean, I think we've heard from everybody. They could all chime in again, but I don't think there'd be any. I think that would be a waste of their effort. So I'm leaning towards 1.
I got 2, 2, 1.
I like number two. Um, Although I would actually prefer number one if we could at some point say, wait, we've heard information that totally changes our minds, which is something that does happen. And say, we're gonna postpone the vote. If we could have that option in our pocket. But if after the kind of discussion that we've been having here today, it's still clear that a majority of council does not like either alternative 7 or 8, then take our lumps, do the vote.
It is an option during, someone can make a motion to postpone it.
Okay,
Sure, that's always an option.
that seems to me like and I also think that if you're going, as someone who gave public comments a lot for years, if you know that action is anticipated, then you speak a little more succinctly and you'll show up instead of, staying home.
That sounds like a 1, yeah.
General business, 1, and next week, and as Councilmember Mockler said, if there's something that makes me really switch my mind and I'm really confused, well, then I'll ask to postpone. But otherwise, I'll switch over to the other option if public testimony persuades me, but there'd be pretty good testimony.
Sounds like this will go on, Michael, not with that. Okay, then this will go on general business for next week. Appreciate everybody's patience and input on a very big project.
Can I just, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
want to ask, I want to make sure it's not that I don't like the other alternatives. I want as big as we can get, but I'm also practical. So when we talk about how other people are feeling about it or the way they're going to vote on it, it's not that I don't like the other options. I love the other options. Do I think they're viable? So it's a matter to me of viability versus
Very difficult choices.
yeah.
Sometimes you just have to cross that bridge when you come to it.
Oh.
On that note, all right, thank you, gentlemen, again, much appreciated. All right, so this will be general business next week with the resolution and materials that we're presenting today. All right, hard ones out of the way. Next on to the campus.
We could also say,
Salad.
after the vote, well, that's water under the bridge. That's, you could do that. I won't.
Can we take a 5-minute break? I appeal to the.
I don't care. I don't need it, but I don't care.
That's in the first part for me, mostly wrap up before we jump into discussion. So
Just go
yeah,
take your break.
I think you're good to take it and not gonna miss too
I'm
much.
We're
Yeah.
gonna go take my break
Okay.
because we're gonna be hearing about the ordinances.
Perfect. Yeah, I think Attorney Fennell's gonna catch us
Okay.
up, so. Okay, with that, let me formally announce, we'll move on to item A3. We have City Attorney Kylie Fennell, and is Attorney Michael Ray is here as well, Assistant City Attorney, to present ordinance to amend chapter 9.32 of the BMC entitled Unauthorized Camping. Sit down there.
I don't like to seat next to Eric because I feel like it's too close to the camera.
I thought that we were gonna get personal here.
It's not.
Denise already moved
I
away
know.
from me. Now it's another person. I was like, okay, there's something wrong. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Get started here. So first, I just want to go over the agenda, Bill. This is the 4th time this is in front of the council. And it's the 5th if you count that when we had a council meeting last week, we did receive a lot of comments on this topic at public recognition. And so this started back on June 26th. We met again on the 5th for public comment. We received public comment. We talked about it, another study session on the 12th. Now we're back at the 4th study session in July. And again, this is one of your goals for this year is to come up with a new ordinance for this section of our code. And this is the work that we're doing to get that underway. So I put down like what I see as the questions that the council needs to consider to kind of start moving this forward. The last time we discussed whether there was going to be a repeal or an amendment, and it appeared that the council, a majority of the council were going forward with an amendment, which I think is consistent maybe with the goals that had been set at the outset. So taking the lead from there, the first question is whether the council wants to see any limitation on camping on public property, even when there's no shelter space available. And so what that means is that there would be a time restriction or a place restriction that was in place regardless of whether there was shelter space available. That was something that the Ninth Circuit said it was allowed. And many municipalities have taken that route and set up ordinances that have those limitations. If the council does not want to do that, does not want to have any limitations, the council could just amend the code to restrict enforcement of the existing ordinance. Our existing ordinance says no camping anywhere, anytime, and restrict enforcement of that code to times when shelter space is available. Meaning when there's shelter space available, there's a restriction everywhere, all the time. It's not allowed at all. But when shelter space is not available, that is not going to be enforced. And so that type of amendment is what Port Orchard and Paul spoke about. And so so I see that as kind of an initial consideration. Most places, it appears, have that as a feature of their code. Their codes kind of started out like ours, where it says no camping anytime. They added that, but then they go on to additionally list some restrictions on camping, even when there is no shelter space available. So see that those as being some of like the threshold questions. If you decide to go with having some limitations that are in place, even when shelter space is unavailable, then we need to decide what those are going to be, right? We prepared some additional material for your consideration, so you don't have the same packet again over and over again like you have before, just actually new stuff. What Michael prepared was a review of other ordinances than the ones we had looked at previously, and he kind of did a verbal review as well as a table form. And so hopefully catching our kind of visual and our kind of more narrative type learners there. It gives you some ideas of what other communities in Puget Sound and Washington are doing. Both, as we've discussed before, there tends to be limitations on places. Sometimes there's limitations on times, and some have included manner limitations. We didn't get into those in the table. They tend to be like about fires. You might see in the news sometimes encampments have been a source of fires, particularly if they're in like wooded areas, or in some places have restricted like the use of propane stoves and that kind of thing. So what we attached is a draft ordinance like the ordinance passed by the Lakewood City Council. That was the one that seemed to have the interest of most of the council, but it is modified. We took out everything that was Lakewood specific in the whereases, but I didn't add in Bremerton specific ones at this time. Those would be added to a final draft, but I really, at this point, we kind of need to focus on those questions of what the limitations are going to be, or if we're even going to have them, and we can figure out the whereases forward at another time. But this gave you an idea of what Lakewood would look like. It's definitely a draft. I wanted that to be very clear, and so I didn't mean to be, I think, somewhat obnoxious about explaining how draft like this draft is, because I didn't want people to get out, see it and be like, oh, this is what the city of Bremerton is doing. This isn't a normal process where a code amendment is being presented to the council, and it's, at least from the administration's perspective, a final form. This is something that I am assisting the council in drafting, and it's very draft-like, and you'll see it when you read it, because there are sections where we have things that look redundant, but it's how different cities have defined certain terms. And so we put both definitions in there so that you could see the wording both ways. Obviously, you're not going to do both of them. And that's like on the definition, I think, of like public or shelter space.
Available overnight shelter.
Yeah, different definitions there. Some cities use protected waters. There was also critical areas instead. And so this was just to sort of put pen to paper and start looking at what it's going to look like for Bremerton. And so I have Michael here, and to give you guys a heads up, I am not going to be here at the meeting next week. He's going to be covering for me, which is also a big part of why he's here tonight. So he'll be taking your input and getting things ready for you for next week. If we decide to go to council, I don't know where this is going to lead, if we're going to end up with another study session or whatnot, or if we're going to just have something ready for you to go. So with that, if you guys have questions about what we provided, particularly the notes regarding camping ordinances, the table, the ordinance, that we're here to answer them, and if we find out what you guys would like to see.
Perfect. And then timeline is certainly, if we have a strong consensus tonight, we could
do it next week. Yeah, I don't have to be here.
Mm-hmm.
My plan is to appear by Zoom, but Michael is going to be in person covering the meeting, just in case I have connectivity issues.
Mm-hmm. If we need an extra study session to keep
Sure.
it through, yeah.
Yep,
But of course,
I'll be
sure,
back on the line.
Sure, I speak for everyone. We don't want to be at this forever. Perfect. So yes, so I guess we're looking for suggestions of to add areas that people might want to see off limits all the time. And so make sure I got that right away looking for council.
Sure. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, clarification. Yeah.
So I think you said that some areas are camping is still prohibited. Like, did you say that in parks?
So, like our watershed has protection, and Michael actually has some more information on the areas of our code that are currently protected under different sections of our code. One of the, I guess, what I would say is challenges with that is that we do have a camping ordinance on the book, and it's pretty obvious that we're looking at this. And we always want to, this is the one that people would look at of what code section fits for this situation. And so if the thought is, well, we aren't going to have those areas off limits because we have this other section code, I probably want to at least address that in our whereases so it's I guess, noted.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that too is that there's a different enforcement scheme under the other codes. They go criminal immediately. Our camping code does not. And so a violation of some of those other sections is, immediately a misdemeanor. We're under our camping code. I think it's the third violation after 2 citations. But all of that is up for First Amendment. But I guess what I would say is there are protections for other areas on the books elsewhere in the code, but when it comes to really enforcing that, and when the specific behavior is camping, it really makes sense to try to figure out where the council is on camping. And if it's that you are comfortable with those other codes protecting it, and I would probably just want to acknowledge that somehow.
Yeah, the react plus 3 or more.
3 or more.
3 or more infractions in a 2-year period.
Well, if you're ready, I'm ready to critique this ordinance. This is the building block. Tell you what I like and what I don't like about it.
Get ready with the notes.
Perfect. And then with the understanding that other people may not be on the same page.
Sure.
But first of all, what I like about it, I like the wetland section. So I would leave that to critical areas. Basically no camping. And this is based on a lot of the public testimony that the main hearing that we had, where we had the residents at MLK, and then we had people representing the unsheltered down at MLK. And I'm balancing the concerns and also what I believe are the basic necessities of treating someone like a human being. And that's where I'm coming from here. So this, first of all, this business about you can't enforce the ordinance if there's no shelter space available. I'm definitely good with that. With the provision that I don't want it to open up, that means you can camp anywhere that's public space. That's what this implies, except for the critical areas or
Right.
whatnot. I don't like that.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that there is a dedicated area, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, I don't know, within the city that we say this is okay for camping. That way the residents, and in this case on MLK Way, they're not camping out on the sidewalk. So there is a dedicated space. What I'm having a problem with is your unauthorized storage and the business about you can't camp, you have to leave camp after between 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. you gotta vacate. So let's say I'm down on my luck. All my possessions are on my back, my tent, and whatnot. And you're telling me I have to get up by 6:30, clear my campsite. I have to carry all my possessions with me while I go look for work, while I go see services? No, I don't think so. What do they do at shelters? Do they require you to pack up and leave? Or is there, my understanding is sometimes they have places where you can have a locker and you lock your stuff up so you can go to your appointments and your treatment and try to get a job and try to get ahead. This is cruel. And I'm not, you guys are just going with this, so, but just let me voice my frustration. That's cruel. Okay. So again, I'm trying to balance it. I want people, first of all, if everybody in the community does their job, we should have adequate shelter space. If not, then it's plan B. We allow public camping in certain dedicated areas. It doesn't have to be all within the city of Bremerton. This is more than what's in the city of Bremerton. This is, as far as I'm concerned, throughout Kitsap County. It's a Kitsap County-wide thing. If Bainbridge Island doesn't have any provisions, any shelters, I can guarantee you there's people from Bainbridge Island are down here experiencing homelessness because this is where, so it should be a Kitsap County-wide effort. Dedicated spaces. And so I wouldn't limit the hours. So if, I mean, I'm not guaranteeing their security, but their belongings, they don't have to pick up at 6:30 in the morning. And that's not realistic. I also think there's complaints about sanitation. Obviously, if you allow camping anywhere within the city, we can't have porta potties everywhere in the city. But if you have dedicated spaces, we can give people, I'm not saying, you know, this is the Motel 6. I'm saying a porta potty and some running water, for God's sake, so you can wash up while you go to your appointments and get your interview. Just the basic necessities. And again, the city is not on the hook for this. If we ensure that there are, and according to this ordinance, I'm okay with it, shelters within a 15-mile area. Maybe we want to tighten. I think that might be a little unrealistic, 15 miles. Maybe we want to tighten that circle. It says from the city of downtown city of Bremerton or City Hall. I'm okay with that. But the other thing is we have to transport them over to there. And here's where I get into, this is a Kitsap-wide county problem. I've been thinking about this. It's a Kitsap-wide problem. Kitsap Transit, the board is all the represented, they're all elected officials. We can make it a priority with Kitsap Transit that wherever these shelters are, wherever these dedicated camping spaces are, that there's shuttle service so they can go to their appointments or whatnot. We can make it a priority because we're all sitting on the board. That's where I'm getting at. Let's give these people a chance to get out of the situation they're in. And I just don't think the way this ordinance is written, that it's realistic. You're just beating these people down. You're just beating them down. So I'm not good with the ordinance. So if you tweak it the way I just stated, again, I want to hear public testimony, but I think it's a good balance.
And just to be clear, I did it off that Lakewood ordinance.
Oh, I know.
This is certainly not my ordinance.
I know, and it's a starting point. We need to have a talking point, and based on the examples, I looked at no one has what I just described, based on those examples. So
The time limitation or the.
yeah, throwing that out, and just what I described. Does one of the cities have what I just described?
Basically a 10 city.
See, no, but be careful on the 10 city. Here's the deal on that though. If the city does its job and we have adequate shelter, I should say, if the county does its job and we have adequate shelter space, there is no 10 city. Okay. So I've been spending time in my YouTube algorithm now is, guess what I get on my YouTube channels, right? So I don't know if it's successful or not, but San Diego, if you Google that one, they have this thing. No, this, I really don't want to go down this road, but I think we have to. They actually have shelters. They're basically all the same kind of tents. I know our climate's different and all that stuff, but again, if they're only utilized emergency level only as an outlet, a relief valve, if there's a lack of shelter space. If we have enough shelter space, they're not used. And then there's no camping anywhere within your city limits. And I think this ordinance, whatever we adopt, should be countywide. And don't tell me that's not realistic, because on this council, I remember, and I don't want to equate one over the other, but Kids Humane Society said, you know, our rules are really difficult when each jurisdiction has different rules for animal control. We need to have countywide rules. And guess what? We passed countywide. We could have a countywide ordinance on addressing camping and have these relief valves put in place, and hopefully they're never used. We know that they probably will be until the capacity increases, but unless someone can convince me otherwise, I'm kind of dug in.
Keep going around. Your other thoughts on and again, to clarify, the majority of council last time directed attorneys to draft based on the Lakewood ordinance. So that's what's come back to us. Is based on Lakewood. Any other comments from council? Yeah, Denise.
You know, I see this element as part of a whole continuum around housing. And I would like to think that if we had adequate shelter available, emergency shelter, low barrier, no barrier shelter, that there would be no people that would choose to live on the street. But I don't believe that's true. For whatever reason, whether it's their issues that they're fighting with or their history with certain agencies, whatever it is, the very edge of the continuum, that's what we're dealing with right now, I believe. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's in that continuum too, but that's why people have been screaming. Affordable housing isn't the answer to this particular issue because it's a different population, it's a different demographic. They can shift, right? And I am so encouraged when I hear Councilman Younger talk about this, because I think all of this council believes in a basic level of human dignity. And so, yes, definitely when other shelter isn't available, there's still going to be a need for what you're talking about. And that might not even be attractive to a certain element of people. So whatever, but it does, I believe that what Councilman Younger is talking about, designating spaces, best serves the community that we're talking about, and making sure that they have that full continuum of services is something I think that we can insist on, whether it's county or city. And so that's why I'm always interested in, wait a minute, why are we considering this when we know that we're losing, Kitsap Rescue Mission when they're moving into the new shelter and that's now in the Quality Inn here in Bremerton, moving to Port Orchard. And yet, I think administration is doing a lot of work that we're not even aware of on this. And I do believe that the mayor, when he tells us that he's working on making sure that shelter, we maintain our shelter space. Don't lose that, right? But what Councilman Younger is talking about is really the first solution I've heard of to long-term services of a more permanent, doesn't have to be permanent, but you know what I mean. It's there. And if we have to pay somebody to run it with the county, so be it. But the lack of services is what I'm most concerned about. And then the E word, enforceability. How is whatever we introduce going to be enforced? Is it going to be enforced? Because I hear we'll enforce anything council says we have. And then I hear at the next meeting about fireworks, that's not enforceable to that full extent because we've got more private. Okay, I'm getting a grasp of all that. I'm always going to put domestic violence first. Having said that, we need an ordinance that will be a tool for our police department to use to protect those citizens that Councilman Younger was referring to. And it has to be services and enforcement. And so actually, before I would support anything, I want to get assurance from the administration that we're on this. And by the time we pass something like this, we're not going to be at a lower capacity than we were when we first started talking about it. We need to increase capacity. And I was one of those people that said the county doesn't do enough. The county doesn't do enough. What I'm saying tonight is that the county, yes, the county has a responsibility. I don't necessarily want a check from them to deliver services in Bremerton. I would like to see these kinds of facilities all throughout the county so that people who are really on hard times have a place like that to have safe and humane shelter, even if it's in their own town.
So sorry to ask and all that, because I know this is there's a huge umbrella of dealing with homelessness, and for Attorney Fennell presented before, the small piece. So out of all that, was there a specific suggestion for crafting the ordinance? I just want to make sure it wasn't lost.
I agree that we need protected areas very strongly. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I do like the idea of protected areas for the homeless as well. And that's a lot harder to enforce when it's spread out all over rather than having a place for them to camp more safely. That's where I am with it. So yeah, I would be for it with the services.
No, I just want to make sure everything's clear.
So I'm just going to quickly recap what I said at the last study session, which is I'm in the minority. I think we should repeal this ordinance and then work on drafting a better one. But I know I'm outvoted on that. The second thing I'm going to repeat is that the audit committee has been looking at potential parcels. They haven't been vetted by the department heads. But one parcel that I mentioned 2 weeks ago is immediately behind the Chevron station on Oyster Bay Avenue. It's between the Chevron station and Public Works, and that's an area that Public Works plans to expand northwards into when funds become available and after the sewer under Oyster Bay Avenue are constructed. Okay. Okay. That is a possible location for a pallet city. I've brought these up again, places that they have a proper roof, they have insulation, they have heat, they have AC, they have smoke detectors, they have electricity, obviously. And these are typically grouped around a single central facility that has toilet, that has plumbing, which is, plumbing, toilets, laundry, showers. This would require somebody to maintain that. But this is a strategy that has worked in the past, and Tony Ives of KCR has recommended this.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get some lights. The lights are, yeah.
I look good in the job. One of the things that I was thinking about today is, do you remember when the woman was raped in the elevator at the parking garage? We are paying $100,000 a year for 2 security guards to cover the 3 parking garages that the city owns. Would it not perhaps be possible to hold them over to Martin Luther King Way until the Blake fix kicks in on August 14th, and the actual criminals who are preying on, I'm coming right back to the ordinance.
Yeah, I know. It's getting a little undermined.
Yeah, so that's one possibility. I think in this ordinance, the $1,000, it is just completely out of whack. I mean, if you're going to be assessing somebody a fine, but if you're homeless, you don't have $1,000. I echo Councilor Younger's statement, because it's like, when you are living rough, keeping an eye on your stuff, keeping your stuff together, schlepping your stuff from one place to the next, it takes up a lot of time. I think these are things that we can fix to create a temporary shelter, and I think that's the most urgent need. The time part of this, I think, is no, because you can't just break down your home every morning and then put it up again. The normal thing of, you're not gonna have camping areas that are near wetlands or streams or steep slopes or aquifer recharge areas. I mean, that just makes sense. I mean, you don't want to have like trespassers there. That's, Ukraine was able to do this like in the middle of bombing. They were able to put up camps that had Wi-Fi and heat and everything, and I think we can too. And I think that's more important than this ordinance, but I have no other specific comments on this ordinance, so I'm stopping. All right,
Michael. Okay, do you want to?
Just so I can jump in, not to address every comment that you made, Councilor Moffler, but I did want to talk about the violation section that you referenced. Again, this came from the Lakewood ordinance. Okay. And I just wanted to explain, it's not $1,000 fine. It's a fine of not more than $1,000. And that's typical for misdemeanors. They're generally 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine. That's the typical limits, upper limits on misdemeanors. The thing that was unusual about Lakewoods is that if you note at the bottom, it says the third, so for the city of Bremerton's current ordinance, the first 2 offenses, I think, are infractions. First 3.
Let me look at it again.
Yeah, so we start with infractions. We don't start with
3 or
Lakewood started with criminal violations, and on the third one, it was
500
a
in 5
minimum
days.
of 500 in 5 days. But they did note, consistent with a separate court decision, Lozino, that the court shall make an inquiry as to the person's ability to pay. Person is unable to pay the monetary penalty set forth in 1, 2, or 3. The court is explicitly authorized to order community service. I'm just letting you know, that the $1,000 is not, $1,000 fine. The court could certainly impose 0. Except if it's on 3 and, under subsection 3, then they need to make it for. That's all.
I said I had stopped talking, so I shut up.
Michael. So, actually, agree, I think, with everything that Eric said. And I like the idea of at least trying some designated spots. I think, Council President last time did mention that sort of establishing tent cities was not a recommended possibility, but I don't know. Anyways, it's something that I would be following. And then it's great ideas and needs to do stuff, and but is not part of what we're trying to do tonight. I like that kind, excuse me, the kind of wetland kind of stuff. Somebody recently mentioned that somebody was sleeping in a culvert under, I guess that's Kitsap Way, is my understanding.
Big fish.
And that could be dangerous also if something happened with tides or water or things like that. So there's 2 reasons. One, obviously water supplies and protected areas, but also some places can be dangerous. So I like that. I kind of had brought up an idea of maybe also kind of following what we might to put in a liquor store, maybe a certain amount of distance from schools, playgrounds, that kind of stuff, because we know that there is drug activity sometimes, not everybody, but it does happen there. And we also have a population with mental health issues also. So when we talk about vulnerable people and protecting vulnerable people, I think we could follow maybe a model that looks like that, and then just, create a little bit of distance. I'm not sure if that's would make a difference or not. Then kind of back to how do we deal with moving forward with this and some of these ideas. By the way, Anna, I was thinking of that exact lot in my head up behind the Chevron. But we could write this and it could say, like, if no designated camping areas are available or shelter beds, then this is not enforced, right? So we can kind of build in that it's going to take a while to put something together. So wherever it might be, or maybe in a couple places, and yeah, and it probably, I will say on the security idea, it probably needs a different type of security than our folks that are downtown. We're going to need probably a commitment from police and fire, and maybe to do some wellness checks. And we know that the porta potties have been a problem there, which has been the holdback on us getting them not there, but we have done the porta potties before, and they've been problematic, and then that's why we can't get service on them. So I think that, unless you have a question about what I'm saying, okay. So I think I said what I wanted to say. So, but basically, like it, I really, there's a nice idea behind. Oh, and just put away their things, and we won't see them during the day. It's just it's wrong. We can't do that. Yeah, I think that it needs to be. We can't put them out somewhere on Warner Road or something like that. That they have to be near some transportation, or we have to provide some transportation. There should be some sort of security. I mean, yeah, like I like these tiny home areas and things like that. I'd love to see us do that, and that could be something that people could also kind of check into. But I think we need multiple communities, because I think that there's going to be tensions, and people might not want to deal with other, people in the community. We probably all don't want to live together, so we need some options. That's all I have.
Can I say something to build on Michael's comments?
Let me just check if Quinn had anything.
I do, but Eric, go ahead.
So I like Michael's suggestion that said that this no camping ordinance is not enforceable if there are no sheltered spaces or designated camping spaces. And so that's it doesn't have to be codified the exact locations in an ordinance. I suggest you don't. That's the administration to determine where designated camping spaces are, but we'll have to add a definition in our ordinance to what is a designated camping space. So I like that part very much. So when a homeowner, a resident, calls the city and says, I got people camping on my sidewalk, what are you gonna do about it? Well, the city can do something about it. Instead of throwing their hands up and says, it's a sign of the times, we're trying our best, whatever. No, city, you can come up with a designated camping space, and then that person can have a place to go. So it's really on the city to do something. So I like that a lot. There was another thing that you mentioned, but I'm having one of those moments. So I'll let Quinn take
Perfect. Go over to you, Quinn.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's being said. I think the biggest thing that this discussion should be leading us towards is how to fund shelters, right? How to fund making sure that beds are happening. I think the balance is, well, until that happens, what neighborhoods, what streets, what areas are absorbing the brunt of the social issue that is houselessness. And so I'm split between a couple thoughts. The first being, if we are going to do a designated space area, I think we need to do it equitably and choose a space in every single district. That kind of cuts against, though, putting resources in a certain area. So I'm not sure how we decide what areas are going to be those designated spaces. It sounds like the council so far believes that a time restriction would be inhumane, because people would have to pack up their belongings every single day. I'm leaning towards that as well. But I think punting the issue isn't the best idea that we could do. I think we need to, if we're actually going to come up with space requirements, we need to come up with those as a council, and not just punt it to the administration. With the administration's guidance and Attorney Fennell's guidance as far as liability issues that surround those, there's a hat that I'm wearing as a council member, but I also know that there are liability issues, and maybe that's my question for City Attorney Fennell. If we do space designations without time restrictions and basically say, hey, here's a city plot where you're able to camp 24/7, what is a liability requirement that we would need to provide safety or any other sort of services there based on that designation?
So what I'm going to go over with you is some information I received on that issue from the risk pool. They provide insurance, of course, for hundreds of entities in the state, and some of which operate tiny house villages, tent cities, that kind of thing. And this is sort of their checklist of things that they are looking for in the people they insure. I'm not saying that all these things have to be addressed, but it's something that they want to know whether or not we are doing these things. And so first, it's been discussed: water and sanitation, prevention of fires, such as fire extinguishers and sprinklers and any structures that are constructed, a source of outdoor heat, or a source for heat for outdoor mitigation sites, and how is that provided? Public safety within the encampment or shelter, and I think that is usually like an attendant or security guard type person who's on site. Controlled access, often they are fenced in areas so that the people in there feel safe, and it keeps out people who are not living there. So it provides security, as well as who can enter the facility. They also had whether there's a exit and egress plan in case of fire or emergency, that is the residents are informed and that you have basically a plan in place for people to evacuate, like you do for buildings, for employees and things like that. Emergency accessibility for fire, medical, and police that needs to be accessible. A code of conduct and rules for behavior. They want to see a copy of that if we do have that. Written acknowledgements or agreements for behaviors, something like that. And also, like, how are those enforced? Is it self-policing? Is it done by some sort of outside agency that might be a partner? And allowing animals in them at the mitigation sites, whether that's allowed or not allowed. If you do you require that they be on leash? If you comment, or is it on service animals? A plan that addresses the accommodation of special needs, such as handicap accessibility, and whether or not tents are kept off the ground using pallets or something else. Is there a contact or something for excess personal property, either on-site, off-site, secured or unsecured? How are they going to access? Who's going to secure it? That kind of thing. A plan to address the presence of rodents regarding food, garbage. Whether you'll have a contractor for that purpose at the site. Whether you plan to screen for sex offenders, and whether it be refusal of entry or segregation if person's sex offending, and whether it will be a low barrier entry model, meaning there's no requirement to be drug-free or sober upon entry, and how will that be screened for, and if there will be any like behavioral health navigators to serve them folks at that, kind of like just understanding what that person's going to be providing care, like are they what is the relationship to the people who live there, and so those were some of the questions that they asked. So there's a lot to think about to set one of these sites up. It's not it involves more than just finding the place. So they need to have services there, and there's a lot of considerations, but they're certainly not unable to be overcome. Everyone does it. It just gives you an idea of what other cities have had, like the things that they have needed to address and setting things up.
Thank you for that. And I also, it's been a while since I've done housing discrimination, but I also believe some HUD laws, some federal laws would attach as well. If I believe shelters ask people to leave so that they don't become landlords and have HUD laws or federal housing laws attached to them. If we were to do that, I'm assuming some federal laws around housing would also attach. Is that your understanding as well?
I don't know specifically on HUD laws whether they're applicable to tent sites. They could be. I could look into that. I mean, obviously, just with reading it, their concerns. There's ADA issues, so that's federal law, right? If it HUD attaches, I know, the service animal requirement to housing and that kind of thing, and so I'm guessing it's certainly something we would need to look into because there's some other requirements as well.
So thanks for that. So that was your answer was kind of confirmed my suspicions that basically if we were going to designate a place without other restrictions like time restrictions, the city of Bremerton would be becoming a landlord with all the liability that attaches there.
There'd definitely be some liability. I mean, I would, landlord's a specific legal term, as you know, under RCW. I would say we would certainly be taking on responsibilities because we would be providing a site for a specific purpose. And so there's going to be responsibilities attached to that.
Right. We would be basically granting a license, not like contracting with individuals. This is where I think we need to be funding nonprofits that know these laws in and out, that can provide the services in the best way possible. I think we need to be putting our money towards some private public partnerships and focusing on, hopefully we'll continue with the audit committee's assessment of what land could possibly be used. But I hope everybody heard this exhaustive list or non-exhaustive list of issues that need to be considered as we go through this. So I think I'm against just designating certain areas without thinking through all of the ramifications that go along with it. I think that it's a lot more complicated than folks are making it seem to be.
I'll take my round here and go around two. Yeah, sorry, great discussion so far. Same, I'll start big and then kind of narrow down the specific ordinance. I think echoing everybody here, I'm so supportive of services of folks who need it. I mean, I look at Pendleton Place as the prime example. You have permanent housing, you have on-site services, you have support. That's 72 beds in Bremerton that just went live, the other year. That is to me the gold standard and all the experts find a way to really help people long term. And I want to see Bremerton do its part. I've also spoken about how we're 17% of the county's population. By the latest point in time survey, we have 60% of unsheltered folks here. So we're already doing more than our fair share, and we're the poorest per capita. So I know our service is limited, and we're dealing with what I think is a failure at the national level for treating mental illness and the state and national level for addressing homelessness, countrywide. That said, going back to Councilmember Goodno's statement, the book I was reading, made a difference between regulated encampments and unregulated encampments. And what it recommended against was unregulated encampments. Honestly, kind of like we see right now in MLK Way and some other parts of the city. Certainly, if you have a regulated encampment with support and services, that's getting closer to a Pendleton Place type model. But when you do the unregulated encampments and either encourage or allow those to form, then you get the negatives associated with it. That's just a lose-lose for the folks experiencing houselessness, for the community, and all of that. I think it was a great comment about is there some percentage of the population that may never take shelter spaces available, even a Pendleton Place? Absolutely, I can't tell you what percentage it is. I think that's always gonna be there, and I do worry about what if we never have enough shelter space in Bremerton. Hopefully we'll get there, but I think it's something we need to think about. So going back to the ordinance, when we're asked to weigh in on, I do think we do need to carve out time or space restrictions. I agree the time one I think is tricky to enforce. The only pro to that is it does prevent the unregulated encampments from forming if folks are having to move back and forth. But I do know what a burden that would be on somebody to constantly pack up and move every single day. So I know that is a tough one. What I was reading some other codes, this is what I'll propose, and I think it jives maybe with some other comments, is that we do have on the code the ability for nonprofits to create basically regulated spaces, call them encampments, or just regulated areas for folks to be at. I might propose some sort of buffer, say like 500 feet from any park, playground, community facility, or school. And that would be enforced at all times, whether there would or wouldn't be shelter space. Happy to, amend that one or discuss it more, but I think carving out, in addition to the environmental areas, some other areas of concern that would be off limits, whether there's shelter space or not. And then, of course, outside this ordinance, making sure that we have those community partnerships to, somebody says specifically, no matter what, that would still leave a lot of room where camping is allowed when there's no shelter space. And then at the same time, work on the resources for having the supportive places. So I guess when we go into round two, do we want to quickly recap as far as the ordinance goes, what some specific suggestions are, and see if we have consensus on some of them? I'm just going to look around the table here.
I'm good with everything that I've kind of heard. I haven't heard a lot of contradictory ideas
I'd like to address, and I think they're extremely valid points that our two attorneys brought up regarding to feasibility, whether this is a pie in the sky idea. The first thing I want to say is by doing nothing, sooner or later, and again, my darn YouTube algorithm points me at all these cases. Portland's a fascinating example where you had people up to recently were like, very pro houselessness advocates, and then they want to sell their house or it really affects their neighborhood. And now people are threatening to sue the city for nuisance properties because in public spaces. So by doing nothing, the city is opening themselves up to liability as well. So we can't just sit on our hands and do nothing. That business model is going away. We have to do something. I do agree that because of the resource limitation, whether it's contracted or it's city, and believe me, I prefer to contract with a private entity or a nonprofit, but I don't see a lot of nonprofits chomping at the bit saying, hey, let's be realistic here. We're in this business about this should be done at the national or state level. Totally agree. But guess what? I have no control over that. I have control over this. I'm one of 7. I have control over this. Okay. So as far as I'm concerned, the buck stops here. It's time to do something. All the litany of lists are just suggested best practices. I don't believe the insurance pool says we have to do every, you didn't say they did. Have to do all one of these things. These are just things to look at. We had public testimony. We had letters written in for houseless advocates that were saying, yes, we want rules enforced. We want people that are breaking the law to be prosecuted. So I suggest, and because of economies of scale, you're only going to have 1 or 2 camping sites in the city. Maybe they can be rotated if this is going to be a long-term thing. Okay, so we can all have our fair share eventually, right? Whatever, you know what I'm saying, as far as talking about equity. To me, be careful about saying 500 feet or whatever, because before you know it, you're going to look at a map and there's going to be no place to put these places. Be careful about that one. The point is, we're going to have to work through it. And if we could pass the ordinance, and it's not enforced at all until we work out all the mechanics, but as long as we're good on the solid fundamentals, I don't think it precludes us from passing something. And then as we work through the mechanics of trying to implement, working with the mayor, we say, oh, no, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to, then we tweak it. But we're doing nothing now.
I do want to make sure we're all on the same page as what's proposed. Can I go to the whiteboard and just, I want to make sure I've captured kind of all the suggestions that are on the table. Tell me if we're wrong then. If we're a suggestion of designate specific spaces for camping. Not the best. There'd be another about, X feet from.
President Coughlin, I think you have a PhD in astronomy, if I'm correct, that you spelled spaces wrong.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a C, thank you.
Oh, okay, I'm just saying, PhD.
That X feet from,
From parks.
that's, did anyone propose that?
Wetlands, yeah, well, like the liquor ones tend to be
Okay.
parks, playgrounds, schools.
Okay.
Daycares.
Parks, schools, critical areas,
Yeah, you can say, you can add the list, whatever.
and critical areas.
And then I don't think I've heard any, but time is out, it sounds like.
Critical areas.
Unless I've heard anyone say
She wants you to write.
Okay, so.
I do.
Okay, so that's all right.
So
I had his eyes.
here is where, if the time, well, if time is the essence, but if time is a critical thing for this thing to work, where people have to pick up a compromise, just thinking out loud, so don't, oh, that's all wrong, is that at these designated camping spaces, if they have to pick up their stuff, so you don't want the landlord thing or whatever, there's a place to store their stuff and they can come back to it, a safe place. See what I'm saying? So they're not, it takes work to do that. And so that might give you an incentive. And I don't know everybody has a different story, but if you have to get in a routine where you got to pack up your stuff, and I'm not saying 6:30 in the morning, goodness gracious, I got a college age kid, 6:30 in the morning. No, that's not happening. So anyway, but whatever that time model is, if it's, well, you got to clean up your campsite, which might be a good thing to clean up your campsite so it doesn't, but then you have a designated area. I remember when I first moved here that I had a locker for my bike down at the ferry terminal. I don't know, they probably still don't have that or whatever, but something like that where you put a padlock on it. The city doesn't have, you have your padlock, and then for whatever reason they can't, and the city can cut it off, whatever, but a safe place to put your belongings. Maybe that's a compromise where you got to pick up your stuff, put it away, and then you can pitch your tent again that night. That could be a compromise. I don't know. It's just one of those things that I'm just throwing out. This is about brainstorming. That's the whole point of doing the whiteboard. It's not criticize someone. That's where great ideas come from. It's just throw it up
I
on the
don't
wall.
understand what time as a possibility means.
So time as in.
Restriction.
Time restriction as in these places, looking at other cities, and trying to want to give an example like that. I believe it's like.
Yeah, I think most
It's
people
8
say
p.m.
they
to 8
disagree
a.m.
with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Specifically want you, that language in that
He's up
ordinance.
I'm so sorry, I was going one at a time, yes.
So I was just gonna add that, I think at some point previously, somebody had expressed a desire to at least see what a time restriction would look like. And so that part in this ordinance is not actually in Lakewood's ordinance, but that language is lifted from Lakewood and Longview's ordinance. Although, I should add, there are some areas that are off limits at all times. During those times. No, strike that, sorry, it's been a long day. Yeah. So, but they have areas also that are off limits at all times, is what I was trying to get
And
at.
some that are only, that are time restricted, like you can be at, like in a park, for example, during daylight hours, but you can't stay there overnight. But, okay. In Portland is the one that we discussed previously after 2 study sessions ago that did the time restriction recently. Although I did hear that they have not started enforcing them.
I mean, other existing or clarification on existing.
Well, we've not talked about this, but it's something, another thought I had is put this into me, but like size. Like, so you can't like take a tent and then tarp it, and then add a RV and that, and I'm sure the fire marshal, the fire marshal would love to have spaces between tents or not more than, like when I do a festival, I can't have more than 700 square feet.
That's under Manor. Yeah, there are some cities that have those, like, that you can't take up more than a certain footprint.
Yeah.
Because, it could get really large. Like, I think people in their mind think of like maybe a 4-person tent, but you could have like a yurt. Right?
So the reality is, so until recently, I used to have to hoof to Seattle, Soto, and the street behind First Avenue, at one point in time, people were building wooden structures, 2-story structures on the street. So again, when you talk about structure, if you have to, I'm not saying pick it up every day or whatever, but that would help preclude someone from that never wants to leave and wants to just build something. But you could also have other protectionisms that prevent it as far as space and what material.
To go back to the Ninth Circuit case, which kind of started these conversations, the Grants Pass case did look at what was required to be permissible to survive the analysis of the court, and it was rudimentary protection of it from the elements is all that was required. And so, like a two-story wooden, structure, they were looking at whether or not you could actually have sleeping bag. And they said that was rudimentary protection of the elements, but so restriction on what a person can use in this situation, I think is permissible. I mean, as far as like building structures, the size of them. In some cities have done
Else, all the good terms. I think this covers kind of the general, what all the other cities have.
Just under time, the majority does not want any time restriction.
This is not what we're agreed on. This is just the possibilities, and I agree.
Got it.
Minority. Yeah, sorry. This is not a consensus list. This is just, I want to make sure.
Got it.
We're starting to focus on what the possibilities are.
The other thing was enforceability. Are we in agreement? It's not enforceable if there are the no camping ordinance is not enforceable if there are no shelters, designated shelters, and no designated camping spaces
Available.
Let's get clarification on this Chris, right now. That's what we can craft. We can say, for example, that 6 feet from parks, schools, community centers is always enforced, whether there's shelter space or not. But then other provisions aren't enforceable if there is not shelter space.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, so you could incorporate that into your definition of available shelter space.
Okay.
You could say, or city designated camping area, even though right now we don't have one. And so if the city wanted to increase its capacity under that definition, obviously you have it built into the code already. I think Portland code has that already. They have something, I think, in there about, I think it's just mayor designated camping area. I mean, we could craft that into the availability of shelter space.
And I think the 15-mile thing it is just too much. A designated shelter within 15 miles, getting to Port Orchard, going through Forest, who's going to do it? Where are people going to wait? It's just it's got to be like closer than 15 miles. It's got to be something people can actually get to.
In terms of where the 15 miles came from, was that straight from Lakewood or was that based on?
Yes.
Yeah, and so Lakewood, I think, is addressing a specific issue where they have partnered with the city of Tacoma, and they have sent, as a part of an ILA, supporting efforts in Tacoma, and that's like that. They are, their shelter spaces are not within their city limits. They're in Tacoma.
And just with our geography here, the water and stuff, it almost would have to be further to be able to find spaces. But I think we would at least find transportation. But yeah, 15. It's a long walk.
The dangerous one.
On a skinny bridge.
So my question is the city going to be willing? What is the city going to be willing to do besides designate spaces? So we've got this ordinance. There's some restrictions all around it. If we were to contact nonprofit agencies and ask them if they are interested in supervising these designated spaces for camping, all of that is going to cost money. And while I wouldn't want to put any kind of a super permanent funding mechanism into an ordinance, I was intrigued with putting in a mechanism within an ordinance to kind of fill the gap for services maybe for a 3-year period. I don't know. It just feels like I don't have any faith in, other than designating spaces, that there is going to be money to operate those spaces. And so if we've got liability concerns, which a shelter provider would take on if they assume this role, as well as the city, but we'd be sharing the responsibility with this nonprofit partner. That's going to cost money. And they're going to say, no, we can't do that on top of everything else we do. And so we're going to be left with either a space that has an incredible amount of liability, because we're not going to provide those shelters with the sprinklers and all of that. I don't have I think there's a lot of emotion or a lot of psychological support for making sure that we can fill the gap in services. And maybe the mayor has a plan that is going to fill those gaps. And I have an email where Salvation Army said they would be willing to consider the operation of any emergency shelter or other kind of service in Bremerton. So we know that there is at least one nonprofit involved. I have no idea how much any of that would cost. No idea. And I'm hesitant to put in a funding mechanism if I have no understanding of how much it's going to cost, but I'm also hesitant of passing an ordinance where there's no acknowledgement of that.
Let's go there, and then I thought I was hand up.
And to your concerns about the liability issues, I am not a human services expert at all, but I have done a lot of reading about it. Probably similar to Mr. Younger, you're some kind of an expert when you start the algorithm, sending things your way. Those aren't the things I'm talking about. Were not just liability issues. It is actually seems to be when those sites are often successes or failures, and it's not a failure for the city; it's a failure for the people who live there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those things, and like addressing them, like learning from the other municipalities and the states and things like that, and what needs to be in place so that the people there are safe and they have the security and the services they need to transition out of there, are kind of what's in addressing there. And there's some liability issues. But I just wanted to reframe it that it's not just about the city attorney is concerned about liability. It is actually about functionality. And so, so that it's a good place for people to go, and positive things happen there instead of tragedy.
Can it be a public health model? Can the county, out of its public health department, operate said program? I have no idea. It's certainly a public health concern. I don't know. I know that this is tipping the iceberg of what, I really do know that, and I don't mean to take too much time with it, but I just believe in services. And I think we're all agreed that we're not going to be able to enforce this at all if there are inadequate shelter.
And then the funding, you and I discussed this. We can't allocate funding in this ordinance. I just want to make that clear.
Well, no, I mean, it's just not the right place to do it. I mean, the council's going to be jumping into budget discussions, so
right. Would do it.
Yeah, they acknowledged what they had already done.
Yeah,
but they did it.
Right, so we can acknowledge.
I see. They went through another process.
It's not in an ordinance.
Right. They just mentioned it in the ordinance.
It's in the whereases where they acknowledge that they had already made that allocation. It's not codified in the ordinance. It's an acknowledgement of what they did.
We go to Quinn because he's had his hand up online a while.
Probably tired.
But let's sort of this list and see if we got kind of majority on some of these specifics.
Yeah. Thank you, Attorney Fennell, for kind of clarifying around that. The laws are created from a policy standpoint, and usually liability is meant to incentivize good behavior, right? Like we have liability around sexual harassment because we want the employer to be really proactive and create a safe environment for people, right? So thank you for clarifying that it's about the behavior that we want to be looking at, and the law supports that behavior. I'm in full agreement with Councilmember Fry. I think that anything that we do that does not have a monetary aspect behind it is going to be, for lack of a better word, cruel. If we're not going to do it in this ordinance, then we need a commitment during the passage of this ordinance that we're going to set aside a certain amount of funds for either private public partnerships or specific fund that the administration can draw upon. I'm in complete agreement with that, which leads me to the next logical question. Do we know how many, right? Like the Ninth Circuit decision states that you can't have restrictions on camping unless, you know, you have these time place ones if there are no available beds. Do we know how many beds would be needed in order to be in conformity with a complete ban? Let's say we wanted to keep this on the books, which I know none of us do, but how many shelter beds are needed from the last in-time count? Does anybody have that information?
So I think the question was to you if you know that answer.
I don't know the answer, but the
55?
yeah, it's what most cities are doing is they establish some sort of a procedure to access real-time numbers, like at the time of contact, so that they know whether there are beds available at that moment, right? And so it's not just a map between your point in time count and shelter space available. It's actually at that moment. And if there's something available at the time that the contact is made and the person is offered that, and then they don't choose to avail themselves of that opportunity, then they would be in violation of the ordinance, because shelter space is available and they're not active. And so that's how most cities have been enforcing those types of bans. They create a system where officers are able to access those.
So what I think might be prudent is getting at least like a median count of the last, I don't know, 6 months or something like that, and then talk to a nonprofit to see how much money would that take to create shelter beds for that number, so that we actually have an understanding of how much funding we would need. Because I'm with you, Councilmember Fry. I want to commit in this budget giving money to creating shelter beds, right? That's like the entire point of this Ninth Circuit case, is to incentivize cities, communities, states, the federal government to create shelter beds, to create housing. So I think that would be an excellent data point that we could use to move forward. But I would want the entire council's commitment if we pass something that does have time or place restrictions, to say that, yes, this is X amount of dollars that we're going to give in the budget.
Yeah, I think you have an answer on that. Yeah, Kylie, go ahead.
I was just going to make one comment too. It's like, even if we got the shelter space available, if it happened to be at that particular time that there wasn't any available, then it goes back to being unenforceable. So you can't say that we tried, and so now we have an enforceable ordinance. It's still going to be that way. It works both ways, I guess is what I'm saying.
Of course, I just, you know, I don't want to create restrictions without also saying, yes, with our pocketbook, we also want to create beds. So, right. So I understand that, but I think we need to allocate some money to this issue.
Anna, do you want to jump in? And then I have some point in time count info.
Yeah. I'm proposing that we limit debate on this matter because we now have too many questions to which we don't have the answers. We don't know how much it would cost for the SAI to reopen and provide emergency shelter. We are none of us, well, except for Aaron, experts on homelessness and what works on it. And I think that it would be a more fruitful discussion if we were talking with people who had actually made this work. And I don't know anyone like that. In the interim, I'd really like to just throw money at the Salvation Army and say, please reopen. Yes, it's an emergency. Thank you, Denise.
I'll bring us home. I don't think we're gonna solve that tonight. I don't think we're gonna get to an ordinance to be able to vote on next week at this point.
And just a really quick thing to remind us all that in 2019, this council passed an ordinance allowing churches and I think other nonprofits to open up their parking lots to house the homeless. And to date, that has not been taken up. Is that correct?
It's not correct.
Okay, my bad.
I mean, I know that my church had people parked.
Great. Thank you.
So by the point in time, let me just answer Quinn and then jump in. And then I get a path for us to kind of close it up. So by the point in time count for 2023, it lists that throughout the whole county, about 102 people in transitional housing, 257 in emergency shelters, and 245 unsheltered. And then of that, 58% said that Bremerton was their place of residence. So if that helps to have those numbers, then you're talking for Bremerton. Then it depends whether you go by population of the county or who is in Bremerton. Gets complicated on how you set the definition of available shelter.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mayor. Yeah, if you want to.
Well, I was going to say, part of what all I hope to be bringing to you soon will be a budget. Depends on how many partners you can bring in, to how much our roles need to be. It's going to be limited to just operate a 24/7, 365 day a year shelter. And so we'll have, we're going to discuss, use this building and lease it. Like, do I come to you with proposals to purchase? And how would that, where would we get the money through partnerships to do that? There's a model that's just had its Salvation. So we have a model that we can use. It considers everything and whether you knew it or not, a slow barrier. And they didn't screen for sex offenders or anything like that. And so it was what we had. And so that's what's now how we come together with this next building that we have in mind. I'll keep you updated on what everybody's nodding around. As far as the budget, again, that's a moving target depending on how many wraparound services do we want on top of it. I know I've heard that from Sean.
So we've got, focusing back on this specific ordinance, knowing it's one small piece of a very big picture, and that we can't add in specific funding at this point, but we can with the budget cycle and other resources. I'm gonna go down this list and just take a quick kind of thumbs up means, thumbs up means, sorry, because of that. I want to be able to give the attorneys something concrete to come back to us next study session so that we can hopefully bring this home. And so knowing that, let's go through and think of if this is something you would either support, the thumbs up support being in the next draft ordinance, so we're voting on it, just support seeing it come back to the next draft ordinance. Something you can live with, you're not real gung ho about it, but you can live with it. Or thumbs down, something you'd really not like to see. And if we go through the list, and that might tell us what things to focus on come back next time. So for critical areas, again, it just should be in the ordinance.
From critical areas.
So this is what, so critical.
Well, the critical area already includes, right, the buffer.
Yes.
So it's not 500 feet from the edge of a critical area, it's the critical area.
I think the current Lakewood ordinance has it.
Yeah, I think it hits the nail on the head on critical areas.
So what's currently in Lakewood are critical areas. All right, so seeing broad support for that. Okay, and then we have designating specific spaces. So I want to be clear here. In this case, to be saying, this is okay to camp in when there's no shelter space, but otherwise,
All other public spaces are off limits. You only can go in the designated camping
so
space.
I'm gonna write that designated spaces only
The right of ways and all that stuff. are off limits.
when no shelter.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah.
Like I see that we have a model right now for housing homelessness, trying to find, there could be something a little bit similar, right? Where there's somebody who knows where they're available. And maybe there's one car spot at that church and maybe another place has 2 campsites. And then maybe we take that parking lot and there's 25 campsites. So you could manage it like that. It's not just go to that dirt lot and live there. It would just be, well, there's no shelter bed, but there's tents, and do you need a tent? And, it could be managed a little bit. And then since we've been talking about funding and stuff, I was wondering if we could, maybe, I don't know if we could get done this year, but could we put money into CDBG, like our own, for that process to handle.
So your example,
Our criteria.
though, is private property. We don't regulate private property, so people can camp on private property with permission from the owners. That's not.
But either way, I'm saying like, it would almost be like a reserved campsite.
That could possibly be managed by kids.
Okay, so
Either way,
next.
yeah, designated space is only when there's no shelter, just in principle, we work out exactly where.
Great.
I'm seeing thumbs up.
Yep, yep, yep.
I'm gonna side, yeah, okay, most support for that one as well.
Gosh, Jennifer.
Okay, then this, I'm throwing a number, I see 500 feet written out, I think it's gotta be adjusted. And what I suggest is park schools and basically, that wording in our code, I've written down.
Daycare center.
Is it childcare or?
Childcare.
Yeah, childcare, schools, parks, and community centers, a bit more than center, but that's the area. And yeah, this number could be adjusted, but let's just say in principle, if we want to enact something, have this, and this would be at all times. Or whether the shelter space or not.
Critical areas would be all time.
And this would be, yeah, thank you, critical areas at all times.
Okay.
Any questions?
Looks
on
good.
what this means? Yeah. We're still gonna give a thumbs up to this one.
I'm sideways on that one.
Yeah.
Just be careful what you're doing on that. I really don't like handcuffing the administration on that. Again, look at a map. We've done similar stuff on zoning and then we figured out, oh, we can't build anywhere because of the map.
Well,
Just be careful.
I guess the question is, it seems like we could designate a place, but people just can't set up on their own. Would that be it?
But yeah, these are kind of conflicting because if you go with just
Yeah.
designate these spaces or
You don't need the other
shelter, then you don't necessarily need it.
But the city-
Yeah, that's
But if
true.
you don't have
Except if
designated.
we don't have shelter.
That's
then
true.
you might want to-
Right, these are at all times.
That's true.
Oh, okay, yeah, I get
I
it.
also like to think of this, probably the very original camping ordinances were just about people traveling through and, like
The camping didn't have a negative connotation.
taking the sort of the unsheltered people out of this equation and where can people go? Designated spaces. So,
We didn't allow camping in parks. That's our
These
current
can't go
ordinance.
exist. Yeah, so you could have.
Good.
Yeah, this is off limit all the time, and when there's no shelter space, like the designated.
Okay.
Okay, so saw majority of thumbs up, so we'll keep that in there. We can work on details next time. Time restrictions, similar to long view. I'm gonna, like I'm down, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So make sure I'll skip you two, you can abstain, but, most of them down, all right, cool. And then regulations on manner and structure, we're gonna memorize the whole draft ordinance from Lakewood, but is that already in there or? But then I think.
Like the time manner restrictions, that was done in other ones, it was, I think Portland had the most detailed, yeah, Portland and Kent had the most detailed banner, and it has to do with, what does it mean? Like, we kind of, everyone's in their mind when you're talking about this, you have an idea in your head about what camping looks like. and then you know what it doesn't, like what's too far, and those places have tried to define that to where it's something beyond what a person needs to be, sheltered, I guess. Meaning like they have, like, there's a difference between a circus tent and a personal tent, right? And somewhere kind of to define that.
Look, in my opinion, you either have, and I'm not an advocate for the time one. I remember in the beginning I said it wasn't. So you either have one or the other, because by definition, if you have the time one, that's gonna limit your structure, right? But if you don't have the time, then there's no limit on your structure, so you need to have an ordinance that addresses manner and structure.
So that you don't build a
Yeah.
condo.
Could it be a space limitation?
Sure, those are the space limitations, like what the footprint can be and that kind of thing, or.
No Henderson windows.
Yeah, certainly a whole great continuum between a car.
It sounds like we need a little bit more information on what this could look like. So how about this assignment from us be to give you some more examples of manner and restrictions? And it would kind of put those in as things to consider.
In principle, someone say building a whole like 12 by 10 shed.
Right.
I think we could, I'm just gonna speak, let me know if I'm wrong, agree that's not something we want to permit. Like that to me would be the way extreme of that's clearly not okay to build that on a sidewalk.
They're temporary.
Right. But then obviously, yeah, no. Yeah. Okay, so let's put that as
I think we definitely have to look at that.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is
to see, I mean, it's something,
this is to bring back to us to possibly refine.
and I know
Yeah.
Portland had the one about.
Okay, so what's the next one?
And then it sounds like there's some question on the definition of available shelter, when we need it, when we don't, and then kind of like distance accessibility. This is,
Sure.
I guess the question is this something we need in our ordinance? Or is
Yes,
this, okay,
yeah,
so we need this
that
no matter what,
ordinance.
okay. This is clear,
And,
we need to write that down.
it can incorporate the designated spaces.
Yeah,
as
for
well.
camping,
So
yeah.
you could say that, available shelter means, kind of like what the definition you saw, or designated camping area, or city designated camping areas, or something like that. So we can work on that.
Okay.
But what I'm hearing is we're not gonna do this next, we're not gonna revisit this next week. You want this back on?
Study session, yeah.
Might just look at that.
Okay, so it sounds
You don't
like,
get to miss it.
let me kind of sum up and then take it on. All right, so we have homework on liquid critical areas, designated spaces, next study session, trying to define exactly what those spaces are. X feet from Y places, put some sample language in there, and we can discuss specific feet, specific places. And then, sample language or definition of structure and available shelter.
So a question, so on designated spaces only, do you want me to write the code that talks about those, or you want me to actually look at a map and find spaces?
I think just
Just
put it in the code as,
Yeah.
and then we'll have to,
the administration can do.
So,
Right.
I mean, actually, I suggest you work with Andrea on that whole thing, of whether it's realistic or not, whatever feet from whatever.
Oh, no, so there's the foot restriction on number 3. I'm talking about number 2.
Oh,
Your suggestion of designated.
I just wanted to make,
places.
when I heard the discussion earlier, what I heard is writing in there that, I mean, basically having, like Portland's code says, no person shall use city property for housing or camping except where the city property is exclusively designated by the city for use for housing, camping, or an alternative sheltering purposes.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want me to like find those places if okay, good.
Much, yeah.
No, that's a bigger situation.
And it'll trigger all the NIMBY.
They must
Right.
reference where those places are find another document or another.
Well, right, it's just gonna be that those aren't,
Yeah.
the,
Great,
it's a placeholder in the code.
great.
Okay. Smoke break.
Okay. I do.
All right, so
we
we're
are-
good with homework.
Our
Yeah.
other homework, I think, are really important homework, and this is something that if need be, we should talk about next week at the briefing, is how much will it cost and what can make it happen that the Salvation Army can open back up? Like,
Yeah, services, that's a separate discussion,
Yeah,
unfortunate as it is, from specific ordinance.
you're gonna do that? That's your
Well,
homework?
I'm already doing it.
Yeah.
The answer
Okay.
is depends.
Yeah.
It really is, it's like how many services we need on site, and so it's not that easy to talk about a shelter, and so we know exactly what we want from the shelter.
Okay.
From my perspective, I
Sorry.
love wraparound. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry, Glenn.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, it's hard for me to see the board on here.
Yeah.
Did we agree that parks should be off the table?
So I think that's something we can narrow in on, but yeah, right now is what I wrote down was parks, schools, community centers, and childcare facilities.
I think there's consensus on parks, and then just the feet limit on the others, like the schools, the daycares, things like that. But
Separate, right?
I thought I felt like a consensus that everybody was okay with saying parks should be off limits all the time, unless I'm misunderstood.
I think that's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So the proposal is attorneys will bring back to us with language that says, I don't know, you can literally write the word X feet from park, schools, community centers, childcare facilities at all times are off limits.
I think there's a separate consensus of no
Okay.
parks are off limits, and then here are some structures that we're thinking there might be a foot restriction against. That's kind of what I
You're
heard.
saying, okay, so let me rephrase that. And sorry, you can't see the whiteboard.
No worries.
What I'm hearing, we'll see if we have consensus. Is at all times off limits is critical areas and parks.
That's what I was hearing. Yeah.
Okay, and then we would then also consider a separate X feet from school, community centers, childcare facilities, all of the language.
Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate it.
That change. Okay, good specificity. Thank you. All right, any final comments? Yeah.
The only point I want to make is that there are shelter costs and there are service costs. And what I'm talking about right now, at least for the camping space or overnight shelter, is shelter. It's the camp, it's operating housing, not necessarily wraparound services at a site where we're gonna have campsites.
And I'll leave it up to how President Coughlin and how far you want to go, but I'm trying to get you a budget right now. And since we're in, new ground here, new territory. I totally respect your question. I wasn't being flippant by said, it depends. It's just, I think there's going to be agencies contributing to this effort. And part of it's going to be they're offering services. Part of it's going to be for the housing. So it's not going to all just be a separate addiction treatment. There's going to be other things. And also part of it's going to be housing solutions where we might be able to transition people into other housing, make more available. If we just do a shelter, we realize there's going to be challenges with capacity. We have other things that we can help people, and I heard that was a strong push for that. We can actually transition into other housing, make more availability in our shelter. So that's what I'm looking for, and I think we've got something for you. Let me go get you something. I'm as want to go as fast as you do.
Feel free to go along in your mayor's report, Beth.
Yeah,
as soon as I can,
All right, Eric, and then let's wrap this up and get to our last item.
Okay, so this has all been great. I'm glad we're moving forward. I think it was well worth the time. There's another component I mentioned when I first spoke up, and that is coordinating with the county and the other cities. I'll let the mayor work on coordinating with the cities because he can just pick up the phone and call each of the mayors. Years ago, we met with Krista and Jewel in the city council, and I have mixed reactions on how fruitful that was. Earlier in June, the county hired Carl Borg as the new coordinator of whatever it is.
Housing and homeless.
There you go. New Housing and Homeless Division. Last time I checked,
on my property tax statement, not that I check every day. But I pay Kitsap County property taxes. I'd like to see what I'm getting for my money. I'd like to reach out to Mr. Borg. I'm asking you, Council President, to do so and find out how we can coordinate our services, how we can work together on this instead of having all these silos. And I know there's things going on that I'm not aware of, and I'm not a homeless expert. I get it, but I'd like to see Mr. Borg.
So already, when he got in the position, sent him a note congratulating him and, saying we'd love to see a council. I don't think we're back on that one. I'll double check, but reach out again. And then, yeah, mayor as well.
Yeah, I'm already working with the county. They are our closest partners.
Okay.
And so, and the 1/10 of 1% is being discussed. And so as a funding source, right, I want you to know that. And, I have a meeting scheduled with them. It's a big move when you start shifting and prioritizing this way, to this crisis. That's what I'm working on right now. And if you'll just let me do my part, to get you a shelter, and with services that we're talking about, you're gonna I'm gonna propose something to you.
Input early and often is fantastic. So that's right. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. So what I'll do, for both public record and Quinn, is translate my handwriting to writing so we can put it in the packet. Then we'll get that sent out. Then I'll make sure to reach out again to Mr. Board, come talk with us. All right, thank you all for yet another difficult one. Only a couple items, but very meaty ones.
At the 3-hour mark.
And yeah, we'll take well, we're well paid.
Hey, we can pummel through. There's
Or we
just,
can pummel. We got the last one here, which I've already punted on a bunch, so I'd like to make a
I am
little progress on.
Going down to my car
Yeah.
where there is food in the glove box. You're going to get that food.
All right, how about we
Okay.
reconvene at 8:10? 7 minutes?
okay.
It's, okay, that's different than the clock. 8:10?
I got 8:10. Yeah. that's
Okay.
All right, 8:10.
All right. Okay.
We're just gonna give another couple minutes to 8:15,
Yeah.
extend the break here. We'll be
All
back at
right.
8:15. All right, reconvene the meeting at 8:15. Now for last item, A4, resolution to repeal resolution number 3349 and adopt a new resolution on updated council rules and procedures. This is one we've punted on a few times, and that's that in tonight would go as late. Has again. Let's start from the top on here, and I'm going to share my screen this time.
The standing committees.
It'll let me.
Page 143.
I was going to go to the slide here. We can call it. We can call it if we don't make it through all these, but if we make a little progress, I think that'd be good. Okay. So this one, to explain again, would just be a clarification in the rules and procedures. That if public recognition hits the 30-minute mark, we close public recognition, we get on with our general business and any public hearings. And then we can come back to public recognition at the end and give everyone a chance who didn't get their 3 minutes the first time to speak. So this would just be, I believe we already have this option, but it's not clear. So I think it'd be good to clarify it. So so we can get to general business. But any, concerns or
How often has public recognition gone over 30 minutes?
not too often, but I think there has been times when it's quite a crowd.
What's been the longest?
Good question.
So probably when I've been council president, when we had the old sanctuary city, welcoming city discussion, we had people overflowing into the hallway. And I remember this coming up, but we had public recognition. I think you were there, right, Mike?
It was right before.
Right before. You were there.
I was
and
there.
It
I
was
spoke.
still holding a grudge. And it was longer than 30 minutes. We had 3 minutes apiece, and we just ground through it because you know, I find this ironic because I had recommended this several years ago, and my council, if I recall, Clarkson said, no, let's keep it that way, because especially if you have a lot of items on your agenda, then who determines? I guess it's first come, first served. And then the other people have to wait until all that other stuff is done, and then they get to talk with public comment. And maybe that's a touchy one, but I'm actually okay with this because it gives the council president discretion. Maybe it's, okay, they're all here on this issue. Maybe the council president can say, you know what, I want to hear from people that want comments other than this issue, get those done, and then go ahead and grab those. And sometimes you may be longer than 30 minutes. You say, okay, let's just grind through this. We got a light schedule. But sometimes if you got people that are collecting overtime, you got a lot of city business to do, maybe it's okay. So I'm good with changing it to 30.
Yeah, and I think it's to me, this is something I had wanted to put in it because sometimes it can kind of derail stuff. You've got you've got people, staff, all these folks.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the same. But I would say that the council president has the ability to say, oh, looks like we only have 2 more. Let's knock those out.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to radically change. We're not going to put the whole thing on a 30-minute timer, but that's like 10 people talking. I think that feels good, but it gives us the structure if we need to lean on it to move forward. So
I was just gonna echo the consultant that are sometimes present that we're paying hourly to attend the meetings. Sometimes it would maybe be nice if, for whatever reason, we had 2 hours of public testimony to go ahead and get to the.
we had it toward the end of the meeting for a little, at the end, right? Didn't we move it?
Yes,
Yeah.
and someone complained about that.
Yes.
Yes, that is correct.
Because
For almost 8 months.
yeah, that's good. I still hold a grudge.
So I could
No worries.
So if you're
Comment.
looking
in
at,
max, I could put a tilde like approximately 30 minutes.
I don't like
Discretion.
this. And I just thought I would mention
Yeah,
that
no.
I don't like this. We're the servants of the people. The people are more important than the consultants.
Quinn has a.
Quinn. Go ahead, Quinn. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, yeah, it takes me a second. Yeah, I believe I'm with Councilmember Mockler on this one. I think especially if we are gonna move it after general business, that's after we've already voted on whatever issue is before us. I think if there's something that's of great public import.
To clarify,
That's-
like, make sure it's clear what's proposed. Public recognition would stay where it is currently under consent agenda. It's just if it went over about 30 minutes, then we can move on to general business, public hearing, and pick up public recognition.
Got you. So the 30-minute is just public recognition, not on general business. If there's an item, like if we have an item that somebody say, we're gonna do like until everybody talks about it, and then we would vote on it. Is that correct?
Correct, not public comment on an item up for a vote, just public recognition, anything on the agenda.
Got you. So anything that is not on the agenda that people want to bring up. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I feel better about it. Thank you for clarifying.
and I would soften it, maybe not use the word max. I know it's a favorite name, but like, just, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And may continue after general business or at council chair's, discretion.
Yes.
So
Okay.
if I recall correctly, City of Tacoma has a similar provision. They have public recognition for 30 minutes and then afterwards they're doing just as you proposed. If you don't want to look for some language, you may want to look at their agenda.
We'll throw out too, and addressing the citizens, not as consultants, but if we're doing general business or taking public comment on those items too, then those people are also waiting around on hearing from something that's not on the agenda. Okay, so I guess so like soften this to approximately 30 minutes.
Or just
Not
30
a hard
minutes.
line,
Just 30
okay,
minutes.
interpretation. All right,
Get rid of the max.
okay,
This max.
yeah.
We love that.
Lowercase max.
Lowercase.
Yeah, lowercase max.
Perfect. All right, so I will make that change, hearing a large majority in favor. Okay. 30 minutes with your max. All right.
And I don't know if the next one needs to be in the list of the agenda. There are different ways to just.
This was I think my slides are the same thing here. This is the next thing that, I don't know who's just to verify, saw it, one of the other cities' code. It was, I heard, the frustration of, we may get something in public recognition, of what are you doing about X or what's the status?
Oh, no, no.
Yeah.
I agree with I'm okay with the ability to do it. Well, I have a little issue, but I just meant it almost seems like it's part of public recognition.
Oh, okay.
It's part of that.
Gotcha.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Where I have a problem with it is this idea that like someone's gonna come up to the microphone and demand an answer. like this sort of like this, it's not a Q. I've said this before.
Right.
It's not a Q&A. Do that. It is you're bringing up, we're recognizing the public to say things, but they're not standing there demanding, because it puts us on the spot too for an answer. Whereas it's great, if they can send it in and we can get the right people to get the right answers and things like that.
See, I took it, I didn't even think about that approach. I thought it was more to give someone a response if someone insinuates something about a council member and they want to have the capacity to address it right away. So during the council member reports, when everybody's gone, a lot of people are gone. But I don't like it at all. In response to public recognition, I don't suggest we do that. And in response, when I was thinking about, so time is on your side. If someone is saying something bad about you for whatever reason, if you decide you can write notes down or whatever in the council member reports, you can address it. You don't want to address it when you've just been blindsided. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. And the other thing is, this is all about being in public office. Get used to it.
Yeah. So, but I don't think that was the intent here. I think it was just a comment on anything that somebody brought up.
And that's for the council president. If he or she decides this is important enough to ask someone in the administration or whatever, I wouldn't put it in.
So I think
What
I have seen. Yeah. So if someone says, why, what's going on with this road work? You can always say, hey, made a public works director, can you cancel that real quick? This was more addressing what I had seen on, comments, public recognition. Oh, council member Younger, I can't believe we hate raccoons.
I do.
And then,
Wrote an
and then
ordinance.
I would see the whole
Wrote an
meeting go
ordinance
by.
against them.
Yeah. And then in council reports, you might say, and hey, the person who spoke 2 hours ago, for the record, I really do hate him. Right? So that was addressing that, but I'm not married to it. It was just an option to throw out.
My concern is that every council member is gonna have an opportunity to talk for 2 minutes. And including me. And I need limits on that. And I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I'm actually not support Quinn and Anna.
Yeah, I'm sure this was vetted by legal and it isn't violative of First Amendment, but I don't trust our Supreme Court right now to not change some laws. Like I could see somebody saying like, hey, you're only responding to people with this type of a viewpoint, but nobody's responding to me. I don't trust our Supreme Court right now, so I'm against it.
I agree. with my legal counsel.
Seeing most people, okay, so let's remove that suggestion.
I don't know if I agree with the Supreme Court comment, but I do agree with Quinn,
Yeah.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Maybe homework on if that's a concern of people and their council member reports address individuals or not. I don't have an idea, but.
I don't think that is, I mean,
Okay.
I had that when you were talking about it, I had the same thought that it's gonna be selective.
Hmm.
That, some folks get a response and some folks
Sure.
don't, and that's just not gonna seem fair, and whether that lack of fairness. could be
And if they
affected.
start to see that they get responses, they'll start to ask us.
Want more.
questions.
Okay,
I think
so
Anna has
good.
a-
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead on, and I think this one.
I think if you could go back to that screen that everybody else was all just talking about. Sorry. I think that would be an excellent place for council reports.
I'm gonna table that suggestion.
It would
Add it.
enable us to actually, get heard.
Before public hearings and general business.
We have council reports and, often they're really interesting.
I'm
I'm happy.
gonna write that down.
I've not seen one yet.
I was gonna
We're not gonna
say,
get through this all tonight. I'm gonna write that down to
I think
discuss
several
separately.
people,
Yeah.
I've even heard you give really good ones.
Because I also wanna
Usually
say
you
if
can
there's
find
anything else.
yourself
Okay.
to,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I just wanna.
I just don't say that about.
Okay.
The mayor has
So
an
I
opportunity.
got that written down to discuss. in
Because the
addition to
mayor
the
has an
other additions.
opportunity to speak to
Okay.
a full house. I think we should have that opportunity too.
I got that written down to talk about, separate. Okay. So getting through these, all right, so this one,
No.
the consent agenda be written only. So this went back to Vice President Chamberlain's kind of suggestion of we've had a few cases where we put something on the consent agenda. We asked the public, do you have any comment on anything on the consent agenda? Somebody may speak up on something and we don't have a real good mechanism to say, oh, that person made a good point. Do we want to pull this off consent to general business? And this was a response to that in that we can require for just consent agenda for a comment to be written only and, set a deadline of say noon the day of the meeting, just receive it. And that would allow us at the pre-briefing to say, all right, did everyone see the comment we got on the consent agenda? Does anyone want to pull it down to general business because of that public comment? But that's the intent of this.
Don't hate it.
I think you just described the mechanism, which is, that was, thank you for that comment. Let's put this on general business. It'll be like right at the end, and if anybody else wants to comment on it.
So, yeah.
So the problem with that would be that it might need to be pulled off that night because, if your staff people, whenever they hear, that it's on consent, sometimes like if there was like a consultant that came and discussed it at a study session, they might not be there at the council meeting because it was on consent. So we either need people to, it can happen, but I'm just saying you might not have the right people there to do a presentation again, because the week before he said it was.
Well, then we'll punt it forward 2 weeks. I think that the fewer restrictions on public comment, the better.
I'm just saying that when you're talking about public, consent agenda, you're talking about something that had unanimous support. And it's probably going to be unlikely that someone's going to make a comment that is going to sway a majority of folks from something that was unanimous. Because I do think that the issue that I feel like is perceived sometimes is that it's like, why do I even make a public comment if there's no mechanism to change it? But we kind of do. Somebody could make a point of order or something like that. You could untangle it and talk about it for an hour.
That's where my recollection of our discussion, there wasn't a good mechanism. Right, because we essentially say, read the consent agenda. Is there any public comment? And then do I have a motion? And a second, and we go straight to voting on consent. No discussion period where someone can say, I move to pull this
item down. I moved, couldn't somebody just call a point of order?
Well, point of order is if a rule's been broken, not a
And it's already
procedural.
been usually a pre-council, the agenda's been established, where we, I think this part of this was to get comments earlier. To get, so that at pre-council, it could be pulled down,
Mhm.
or,
Or even earlier.
Yeah, or they
Like right
can
after
be
tonight,
addressed.
someone wrote in a comment. Tomorrow, one of us could read it and say right away, oh, hey, that general meeting 6 days from now, I want that to happen.
yeah.
This feels to me like it's for us, or for staff. It also adds some complexity, and I think people are really confused already about when they're supposed to speak about what. And now I have to remember, oh, if it's on consent, I have to email that. I can't just show up, and I that concerns me. I want to make sure the cost benefit is a good balance.
Maybe she was-
Like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah,
What'd you
I
say?
don't know, maybe like
Hitchhiker's Guide.
more
to
like
the
public
Galaxy.
service, like, council will accept
It was
written
posted.
or oral comments, so something, or encourage people to to write in maybe and do both, that way, like, get their service. I don't know, that was, I just remember when we discussed it.
Yeah, Quinn?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think that if we're gonna encourage people to do writing, I think we still need to allow them to comment. They might have just looked at the agenda like 10 minutes before they got off work and shutting down and saying, hey, you were supposed to write this because this is part of consent agenda. I just don't think is a good practice.
Okay, and hearing,
Yeah, could we, and it doesn't necessarily have to even be in the, well, maybe it does get in the rules, but could we have something that says, maybe it's on the agenda itself, written comments are encouraged before X PM, or some, and, yeah.
Yes, and.
yes. Okay, so let's, throw that out there like that. So change, make it clear written comments preferred, but still allow oral comments on consent. And then
Just like encourage.
encourage, sorry.
Encourage.
Encourage, not preferred, encouraged.
And I wouldn't add anything about that. Verbal comments are still just
Yeah.
written comments.
Yeah,
are
we still have in our procedure to say, and now we open it up. And then
And maybe like including a cutoff time so that our staff knows, so that they can say comments received by noon will be included in the packet, and then after that, maybe iffy, because I feel like sometimes it is hard for them to have.
So essentially it's
Well, it would stand out as something that had a deadline.
red line here.
It could also be something, where there's 3 emails came in, the council president said, we did receive 3 comments on this, they've all been provided to the council members.
Yeah.
And they're in the packet.
And you didn't change your mind. Or you did.
You don't have to codify this. You can just do this. Don't. You guys are.
Okay,
You
so
guys are codifying everything.
well, we
It's
just need
crazy. It's crazy how much you guys are dig into the.
all right,
The
let's
details.
keep it on topic. All right, so I will.
It is on topic. The devil is.
We'll somehow find a way to encourage written comments, so still allow oral, maybe.
Lori Smith's listening, you should agree.
Here's a way that you could encourage written comments. And it would be
All right.
during public recognition, this is something Kevin Gorman used to do a lot, which would be to say, you know what, that's really interesting. Email city council. Here's our address.
Yeah, I do that. So, okay. Tackle one more at least.
Okay,
Whatever you call it. Get this first page.
yes,
I think this one's pretty easy.
yes.
And some of these are just need consent to sign, because this one, so again, if you remember, this came up because there was an amending motion that had a second, and then we were discussing an amending motion, and there became a real uncertainty over whether we should or can take comment once that amending motion's been made. And Angela Hoover went to a conference, checked around, and said that's basically up to the Robert's rules and all that, council president's discretion. Sounds like by OPMA, we could go either way, or
But better way would be to allow it. And the reason I say that is there were updates in 2022 about accepting public comments prior to council action. And so if the comment is on the previous motion, and then in your discussion it gets amended, well, you don't know if the comments that were made on the initially apply or how people feel about the new thing, right? And so this would be a chance to have public comment on the new motion, and so I think that's important.
And I put the CP's discretion because maybe it's a really tiny tweak that is just like, so.
Sure.
Response, but yeah, something, a whole new motion. Okay, perfect. All right, so keep that in there, sensing people are hitting the end of the night, we'll pick it up.
Audit committee briefing.
All right.
That's what I've been waiting all night for, Anna.
Yep.
What?
Nothing.
All right, next week, the general council
You
business,
messing with me?
B1, all right.
Talking to
The
me?
left side, talk the faster we can get out of here. I have to wrap it, there's law, PMA, next item, B1, audit committee chair Anna Mockler to provide a summary and highlights of the special meeting held July 13th.
Thank you. The only reason this meeting was special was that both the auditor and our staff member, Christine Grenier, had vacation. So it was just moved. There was nothing special about it. It was our regular meeting. Auditor Jenny Sims has not yet presented to the department heads a list of 31 parcels out of the original 450. She's still working on them. Some highlights from these were, again, the shorefront property at the stumpy end of Tahuya, Lake Tahuya. The property that I've spoken about 5 times now, between the Chevron and Public Works. And something that seems really interesting, which is 5 lots between 11th and 13th on Warren, on the west side of Warren. 5 contiguous single-family lots, or small single-family, but 5 contiguous lots. So that, yeah, between 11th and 13th.
No, it's city-owned.
Yeah, all of these are city-owned properties. The auditor and Christine on June 6th checked the evidence room at the police station and all as well. We approved a $2,300 increase to the auditor's budget, and that will be brought to you for the budget. Yep. Done.
Perfect. And then next item, I'm guessing the just the assets are gonna come out in a memo for the surplus properties.
I'm full of hope. It's Christine wants, Christine, I'm so sorry, I am tired. The auditor wants to bring all of these to the department heads. Apparently that's the procedure. Yeah. And to say, is this encumbered with something?
Perfect. Okay. So ultimately it'll be a memo.
Yeah. So we're full of hope.
All right. Any other questions on the special meeting?
Yeah.
Yep, Eric.
So I don't mean to create extra work, but if you really want this to be useful for your broader city council,
Yes.
Jenny's report, she lists these properties, hyperlink them to the parcel number or something. That way I could, this property.
She did.
And I can just click on it and I can open up a map and see it exactly, because you just told me 11th through 13th. Well, everybody else is talking. I'm trying to figure out, is that before or after Olympic College? Well, where is this?
11th. You know where 11th and Warren is, right?
Yeah, I know, but it's
13th is the end of Olympic College.
so I'm thinking
It's the next slide.
a long time ago, all that property was eminent domain, except for one. I'm not eminent domain. Olympic College bought them all except for one house, and there's a lot part around. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I wonder if those are city. But anyways, that's. I'm a visual guy. I like to know exactly.
The spreadsheet. Yes, I will send it to you. The auditor wanted it to. I will send it to you, but each one is hyperlinked to the parcel number.
Great, thank you.
With imagery and all that jazz.
Then Quinn, did you have your hand up on the audit committee, or was that I was sharing my screen?
Yeah, sorry, my technology went out for a minute. Anna, did you read in Jenny's email?
Much earlier. you want me to
awesome.
read it in again?
No. Perfect. I just, it must have been the time that my audio was out. I just wanted to make sure we did that. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Do you guys want to hear every
No.
word of?
All right, and then back to Anna Mockler for the audit committee held on July 18th.
Public Works
I'm
Committee.
sorry, Public
No
Works
worries.
Committee held on July 18th.
It's very cheering to know that you two can get tired. So this was July, so it was the capital projects. So I'm just gonna give you the highlights and then you have the other two members here, so. Here's an interesting thing. They can't get the Ford Lightning all electric pickups and Eric only said, as Eric had told them, they would have difficulty doing, or the Ford Maverick hybrids that, remember, yeah. So they are going to replace these hybrids with all gas vehicles, and this will not come to council because it is below the $100,000 trigger. That is correct.
I just want to state that again. So the F-150 Lightnings are unavailable at the moment, so they're going to buy different vehicles.
Or the Ford Maverick hybrids, those are also unavailable. So they are going to get the hybrids, they're going to get the Ford Lightning hybrids now, and the Ford Mavericks will be not hybrid, but all gas.
There are no such things as Ford Lightning hybrid. They're gonna get a Ford F-150.
Okay,
Just
so I was right the first time, good. Thanks.
maybe there's a Ford F-150 hybrid. I don't know, because, but they're not getting Lightning hybrids. There's no such thing as a Lightning hybrid. It's a
Okay.
Ford Lightning. It's electric.
Yeah,
All right.
well, so it's not going to come before us. It requires only the mayor's approval to be switched from electric or hybrid to gas. Okay, so moving right along. If you have a specific capital project you want to ask about, speak up, but the new one is the East
I
Ninth,
lived it.
the East Ninth Street stormwater improvements. This will be happening 2026 at all. It's coming to council in September-ish. They're writing the RFP right now. It's to improve outfalls. That's the driver, and this is going to be paid for with ARPA funds. Okay, Mr. Riley gone? Okay, cannot ask him this then. The Oyster Bay Beach main replacement construction is essentially done. This has been going on since Hector was a pup. The beach sewer in Manette, they're still meeting. They're, an MOA is being circulated. They're hoping they can build 2024. On August 9th, we'll hear about the Tracyton Beach Road sewer improvements. See, moving right along here. Here's something that I found really interesting, so tell me if you guys don't. 11th and Perry is practically done. They are currently installing the light pole bases and the soil cells. And I, of course, asked about the soil cells. They're planting shrubs to replace the trees in Manette. So that is what there will be, is shrubs. It will be a shrub-lined street.
Not trees.
They said
That is
trees
correct.
too. No, later on he said and trees.
Small trees.
Will they be covered?
No, they're designed not to become.
I'll ask about specifics. Yeah.
I would very much like to ask about specifics.
So, somebody was kind of grousing to me of that, even though the project is nearing completion, it seems like the light poles are way out there,
They have to fabricate them. They are special light poles.
like you're doing right now with this story.
No,
It's
No,
just
actually,
too
I'm
good of a
not.
pun to-
they have to fabricate the light poles, and it's another one of those supply chain things, but also a lot of people are suddenly going, wow, we want to be out and about and among people and we want light poles, I imagine. But for whatever reason, light poles are tough to get. You have to make them, and these are particularly pretty.
Oh,
But
really?
it's not.
I find this whole conversation in light. Go ahead.
Do you? All right, I'm gonna just hoard my
Sorry, when you say
puns
close to
and
done,
just
you mean the
cataclysmically
the
descend on it.
Perry portion though, right, of 11th and Perry?
Sorry?
You're talking about just the Perry portion is close to complete, not the whole thing.
No, they're saying like they're pouring sidewalk now. They say they have 3 months to go, but may finish sooner. But when I was saying something
Yeah,
was basically finished, that was when
You said
the
11th. and
Oyster
Perry.
Bay, Oyster Bay.
Okay, yeah, so 11th and Perry is, yeah, several months
Yeah.
out on 11th Street.
We
Yeah,
have
Perry.
completed the majority of the work and have moved down to on Perry. Now they're on 11.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the light pole bases for some reason have to be fabricated or made up. Yeah, long lead time. Not gonna talk about Warren Avenue. I feel we've all heard enough about it. One of the things about the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, the thing that's gonna make crossing safer is the costs of the easements have increased a whole lot. They're applying for a grant to put sidewalk along Lafayette bordering Haddon Park. I know that's not great for you, but big for me.
It's great for them.
Important thing about 6th Street, I asked about the preservation phase 2 phase 3, I beg your pardon, that they're doing this year. And Shane says, and I'm quoting, wouldn't need much amending to incorporate the road diet. And they've been working on every phase to make it so that it can be more easily converted to the road diet. All the striping in the city is done. I believe all the chip sealing, slurry sealing, micro surfacing is done. But certainly all the striping is done except on these newly paved streets where they have to let it cure for a few weeks.
How many pages does she have there?
It's the capital project. The Upper Shore Drive in conversion in Manette, where they're closing the street, has gone from 100,000 to 200,000. I know. And as whoever presented it said, you'd be surprised at how expensive it can be to close a street. I am surprised. Staffing on streets, Public Works is now finally up to what was recommended in the 2018 pavement analysis, also known as the IMS. Final item was safe routes to school. Eric jocularly said that, what a Swiftie that would be. I love sports, he said jocularly.
Do you recall this conversation? Michael, you were there.
I wasn't there. Oh, my birthday.
Oh,
Eric said
well, then
that,
as he said, she said. So you just want.
Eric said that it was pretty easy to get safe routes to school, and he should know because Kitsap Lake, his district, is the only one of them that's complete. So I brought this up and I said, hey, I hear that these are easy to do. But apparently they are not. We're being asked to bring our portion up from like 10,000 or 15,000 to 25,000 so that kids can walk safely.
That's nothing.
It's still nothing. Eric asked if it was possible for them to, apply for 2 grants at a time, and I found their answer confusing. But it basically seemed to be like it doesn't work as well, or it's not how they've been
They
doing.
compete against each other.
Don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah. But it's not because they were trying to make their answer confusing. I found it confusing. It was about this time in that meeting. So that's pretty much what's happening with safe routes to school. I figured I'd look around and go, everybody okay with like kicking in 25 grand for a match for the other safe routes to school that have not yet been done? Armand Jar, Crown Hill, et cetera, et cetera.
Are you asking for?
Oh, we aren't done with
Decision.
Elmira.
No, I'm just asking general consensus.
You read.
In general, would you guys be okay with that?
Can't comment without, no, more.
So absolutely.
Okay, good. That was Public Works. I asked about the biannual mobility report and another report that's supposed to be delivered every year or two, and it's, it will happen, but it's another one of those things where it's like, they just got their staffing up to where they were supposed to have it in 2018. There's not infinite staff. So that's about it. Did I miss, anybody have a capital project they want to hear more about? I got the details here. I got the horse right here.
Please. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really do actually appreciate the comprehensive report back. It is extremely helpful to stay in the loop. So
Thank you.
Thank you for the detailed notes. Next up, Quinn Denny here is Vice Chair. I believe led the last meeting for the Finance Investment and Partner Committee. Any summary from July 25th?
That was me.
That was Michael.
Oh, hi, Quinn.
I was wondering. All
Is that
right.
what it says? on
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Sorry. Michael now is
So,
Vice Chair.
can you load up my slides? No, I'm just kidding. So, Hans Nilsson presented on the next phase of this dark fiber project that's been working on. So they've got about, I think it was 41 like sites that they're gonna be running this fiber, and it's this closed sort of loop part of us improving our infrastructure. One of the things that I found really interesting is actually they're going to be running a loop through Silverdale, because it's they're not running lines just for us, but on a cable we get like one thread, sort of, as a way to think about it. But since we have bridges and things like that that could cut our city in half, it'll be redundancy. So it's kind of interesting. So the big picture here, they worked out a deal where I think we're going to do, at least this is a little coming before us, we're going to, I think, pay about $300,000. That actually kind of helps Astound roll this out. And they're kind of betting on us being a long-term customer to this investment. And it brings the cost down almost $200 per site per month. So it's almost like each of those 40 sites is a almost like having DSL or cable at your home. So anyways, that's kind of interesting on that. The other thing is all these sites, there may be a few that are new, but like some are like maybe Charter and some are CenturyLink and some are, so it just kind of makes everything uniform. And so anything else you'd add on that?
No, we had a pretty deep conversation. Both Michael and I have some tech background, so we were talking techie stuff that you don't want.
A lot of ones and zeros. And then Chance presented on.
Oh, it is basically to get a grant.
Oh, yeah.
That we get every year, and it varies. I think this year it was like 135,000 for stormwater. That's a no-brainer.
Stormwater grant. So you just needs to run it by us to apply for it. Other than that, was it was a pretty quick meeting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Quick questions, comments?
General good of the order?
Perfect. Any other committee boards briefings? I'll save mine too. Yeah, on general council business, I just have one. I want to circle back during the budget meeting. I believe there was going to be a sub-quorum of Anna, Jennifer, and Eric to look at writing some survey questions that could go in the water bill. And I wanted to just check in.
You should have named a chair for that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I realized. So
I sent you guys some stuff. Shall I send it again?
do you want to organize it?
Sure.
Anna, get a meeting.
I will be the chair of the sub-forum.
Perfect. All right. Rose up on that. I need a quick go to the order.
I'm going to be as quick as I possibly can. Looking at the comp plan, which our current one tells us that the Bremerton's pedestrian streets are low volume and low speed, which, no. It suddenly hit me that everybody else in Bremerton has a chance to, like, we're not allowed to go to the hearings. We're not allowed to comment at them. The ones that they're doing every month. We have no way to comment on the comp plan until the whole fire hose of it comes to us. And I would like us at the next study session, if you're interested, to think about some mechanism where we could get it piece by piece and be able to ask questions. If I'm the only one interested in that, then so be it.
So I know what will come to us, and we can basically edit all of it if we, feel so choose. I do understand though, the ones that's in writing before us, it's harder. I do know there's some walkabouts with each district and each council member that are going to be planned, I believe, by the fall. probably a good opportunity to give personal thoughts on each district.
So this question has come up before.
Yeah.
Past councils, and Andrea usually fields it and explains why you don't want to have council members basically influencing the decision before it gets to the council. Keep that separate. Having said that, with our technology now, we got people on the internet watching this meeting. I believe we do. I don't know if that's the same thing for planning commission meetings, and if so, why aren't they? So you could watch them.
I did, and I was not allowed to comment.
Well, that's fine. You should be able to watch them.
Yes,
I don't
but-
think you should be allowed to comment. I understand you're a citizen, but you also, this is one of those things, Anna, people don't understand. You become a council member, you have certain powers that other people don't have, but you also lose a lot of rights, and that's just the nature of the beast. And one of them is to make public comment on something. So have someone else make the comment if it really is, like, nothing precludes my wife from making a comment. So,
My point would be that I understand that I lose rights, but I don't see why my constituents should.
they don't in the end.
They
You vote.
elected me to represent them. So that they didn't have to go to each one of these meetings.
Right, and you voted in the end. You voted in the end. The policy.
Yeah, I would say at the end, you still have a chance to, I'm not hearing a large majority that feels.
Okay,
strongly
so I'm the
about,
only
yeah.
person who cares about this.
You know,
Okay,
I think,
so be it.
I think there's concern with me about all that we're putting our hope and faith in this comp plan. And I do believe that our role is minimal and that we have very little opportunity. I'm putting a lot of faith in that walkabout. I've already been taking notes as I'm walking around, and I want to go through the process and trust it. Our concerns have been voiced. We've been reassured. I'm going to trust it for now. That's just me. I'm going to trust it for now, participate as fully as I can. And then once the process is over, that's when I'll critique it. Did that work?
Maybe it would be helpful to get another schedule in writing of exactly the following steps, and then when it basically the draft is coming to council, for us to start tweaking. So that, yeah, be helpful.
Sure.
Okay. Okey-doke. The order. Hearing, all right. In that case, I'll announce the next council meeting will be on Wednesday, August 2nd, beginning at 5:30 p.m. in the meeting chambers with a remote option. Thank you all for the late night. Meeting is adjourned.
Night, everyone.